Good afternoon. I welcome all the participants to this refresher course on internal audit. I, at the outset, would like to thank the chairman WRC for encouraging us to organize this program. I also want to thank CH Charanjot Singh Nanda, chairman of Internal Audit Standards Board, for giving us all the support. I want to thank all the speakers, the moderators, the panelists for agreeing to spare their valuable time with all of us here in the 5-day series of 3 hours each. So we will be looking at all the standard of internal audit, the revised ones, and their application over a period of 5 days. I also recognize presence of today's first learned speaker, CA Huzaifa Unwala, and the panel for today, moderator CA Haresh Dua, and 4 panelists, CA Venkat from Ashok Leyland, then Anil Gambhir, then Bhaskar from Tata Capital, and Mr. Venkat from Siemens. I also want to thank the Internal Audit Committee 2021 for WIRC, for all the committee members for helping and providing the support, mainly Sumit Doshi, Rishabh Jain, Gaurav Mishra, Purvi Malani, for all their support in helping people in registration. And I want to thank all the WRC staff, Mishra ji, Subhash, Vaibhav, Seema, for the support, and also thank all the participants for joining in large number. Let us have a good learning session over the next 5 days. So with that, I request now the chairman WRC for his opening remark. Lalit bhai, over to you.
CS Nandaji, Central Council member and Chairman Internal Audit Standard Board, and a prolific personality and a person with a big heart for members and students. Experts for the day, Huzaifa Unwalaji, Harish Duaji, Shri Venkatraman, Anil Gambhirji, Venkateshji, S. Bhaskarji. Coordinators for this particular program, Sanjay Nikam, who is available on the board. All the participants, friends and colleagues, on behalf of WIRC, I welcome all of you in this August gathering, wherein we are going to discuss various aspects of internal audit in 5 sessions, 5 3-hour sessions. Let me compliment CM Mufida Kachwalaji for organizing such a wonderful detailed event on the subject of internal audit, wherein I think so he has tried to cover all the spheres of internal audit for the benefit of members. This is one of the action plan of WIRC to come out with 360 degree of coverage of subjects, and this is one of the subjects. As far as internal audit is concerned, I am not a man of audit, but I can understand to the extent that when we talk about internal audit, the perception of management is somewhere value addition or cost reduction. I think so by participating in this particular refresher course, we all will be really enriched on this area and will be really able to provide more better services to all our clients. As far as WIRC is concerned, we have taken many initiatives. I would like to share a couple of these because as an opportunity to interact with all of you, we look forward as if you should be aware about all the activities of WIRC. First thing is helpdesk, which is lively working and successfully working at WIRC. E-publications freely available on WIRC website. You can visit and download whichever publication is useful for you at any point of time. Industry-specific interaction meet, wherein we have continued and we are going to conduct for around 10 to 20 more industries in next 3-4 months, wherein through those interactive meetings, we convene discussions and we plan for further activities related to that industry with respect to representation and various other activities. We have started with a research forum with an idea to engage our members and at the same time participate in some sort of research activity. We have started with a mentorship assistance program wherein the youngsters coming into profession, the idea behind it to assist and to help the youngsters to design and develop a proper mechanism and mindset of developing their own practice. We are trying to engage and enable women chartered accountants who are on who have been on sabbatical or for some other reason and again wanted to rejoin into profession. There are various other initiatives like career counseling, help desk, other initiatives. I would request all the participants to go through the WRC newsletter and visit WRC website to be updated about various initiatives and request you to participate and contribute in various initiatives of WRC. You can write to us at wrc@ici.in. With this, I once again welcome all of you and I look forward for words of wisdom from our senior in the profession, CS Nandaji. Thank you, Murthy.
Thank you, Chairman, for your welcome and the kind words. Let me now take the privilege of introducing C.A. Charanjit Singh Nanda. He is the chairman of International Standards Board. I'll briefly introduce him and then we'll hand over so that he can give us a view on the IASB work. Mr. Nanda is currently a Central Council member for 2019-22 of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. He is the chairman of International Standards Board of the ICI. He is the vice chairman of Corporate Social Responsibility Committee of ICI. He was vice chairman of the Banking and Financial and Insurance Committee and nominated on the IRDS Steering Committee for Implementation of Risk-Based Capital Regime. He was member of Quality Review Board set up by the Government of India, was member of the Central Council for 2004 to 16, and he has files. He has been a prolific speaker on various occasions at multiple places, and his contribution at the NIRC also has been tremendous. So I request all the participants to welcome Nandaji. Nandaji, welcome and over to you, sir.
Thank you. A very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The Honorable Chairman of WIRC, C.A. Lalit Bajaj, the Secretary Shri C.A. Murtaza Kanchwala, the speakers of the day, Shri Hufeza Unwala, my very old friend, Mr. Bhaskar, Mr. Harish Dua, Mr. Anil Gambhir, Mr. Venkataraman TV, Mr. Venkatesh, and all participants who have come here to go home more and later. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a proud privilege to come and be a part of the opening remarks and give the keynote address on the refresher course on internal audit. Let me very candidly put it that we chartered accountants are a class apart. A man once exclaimed, तारीफ की चाहत तो नाकाम लोगों की फितरत है, तारीफ की चाहत तो नाकाम लोगों की फितरत है, काबिल लोगों के तो दुश्मन भी कायल होते हैं. So we belong to that clan, that community which was set up an act of parliament way back on 1st July 1949, when the most important document to the democracy, the constitution, was not adopted. You are all well aware that the constitution to this country was adopted on 26 January 1950. The pertinent question that arises is, what prompted the Constituent Assembly to set up an Institute of Chartered Accountants of India when its own democratic setup was not in place? The answer is very candid, very simple, very forthcoming. They were looking for a disciplined band of soldiers to steer this country out of confusion. And we continue this role even today in such pandemic times. Yes, we work to render services that can bring back the society into the right proposition. I'm in the habit of saying couplets, and one more couplet I will like to share during the course. It says, Zameen और मुकद्दर की एक ही फितरत है, जमीन और मुकद्दर का एक ही फितरत है, जो बोया है वो कटना तय है. So whatever what you shall sow, you shall reap. So as chartered accountants, the institute is beset with the problems. And when it comes to professional opportunities, internal audit is one of the sunrise opportunities that gives immense prepositions to chartered accountants to work, to understand the systems, be system experts, give probable solutions, and ensure that proper handholding is done to the stakeholders, to the clients, and even regulators and government. I will give my keynote address. Sir, overview of internal audit. As per framework governing internal audits issued by ISB, internal audit has been defined as the internal audit provides independent assurance, very, very important, independent, whether an absolute assurance or a limited assurance. We internationally thought about the assurance prepositions, and your institute, the Internal Audit Standard Board, went ahead. And well before pandemic, some 8-9 months back, we came that you can give either an absolute assurance or a limited assurance on the effectiveness of internal controls, which is again very important, and risk management processes, overhauling of the entire process structure to enhance what are the byproduct, what is the purpose, what is the relevance, to enhance governance and achieve organizational objectives. So it is internal audit largely is a management function which is designed to achieve organizational benefits. Now, what do? It is aimed to increase the overall quality, credibility, consistency, and comparability of the work performed by internal auditor. It is a value addition which is required at the moment. And for that, your board is working day and night. Your board has till date issued 13 new principle-based standards on internal audit. And I'm told that Mr. Huvesa Unawala would take all those standards. Yes, 13 new principle-based standards on internal audit, apart from the revised preface to the framework and standards on internal audit, framework governing internal audits, and basic principles of internal audit. We are also in the process of finalizing and issuing 6 more SIAs, which have been earlier issued as exposure draft for public comments. The board intends to issue at least 40 standards in this year. So I take this opportunity when I'm addressing to so many captains of the industry. Anyone amongst you intends to participate in the standard formulation, you can very well write to the board. You can write to me, mail to me, call me. My number is available at ici.org. I'm a council member, and you all can see my number from there. Going ahead on standards on internal audit. Revised standards have been renumbered and classified in the following categories. Standards on key concept, we have given 100 series. Standards on internal audit management, we have given 200 series. Standards on conduct of audit assignments, we have given 300 to 400 series. Standards on specialized area, 500 series. Standards on quality control, the mother standards, we have given 600 series, and the miscellaneous matter standards, we have given 700 series. The institute has initiated the process of revising SIAs and making them mandatory for certain classes of companies in a phased manner. We are very keen that once they are brought mandatory, they will have a larger perspective. So going on to the board strategy when it comes to finding out the internal audit proposition. The first thing which an internal audit, the board intends to bring to the membership at large, the first thing is imparting knowledge. The boards intend to impart knowledge, yes, by setting up standards on internal audit, where I invite all of you to be an integral part. Second, generic internal audit guides, 16 are issued, and we are doing it even now. I made 3 study groups in Mumbai itself, and people are involved in helping us create generic internal audit guides. We are also keen to write industry-specific internal guides, and we have issued more than 26 of them. For achieving something, you need to work hard. सोचने से कहाँ मिलते हैं तमन्नाओं के शहर, सोचने से कहाँ मिलते हैं तमन्नाओं के शहर, चलने की जिद भी जरूरी है मंजिल पाने के लिए. We'll have to toil hard to ensure that we work at the highest level. The second area of the board is to ensure that we reinforce knowledge by holding webinars on mentoring SMPs, internal audit, virtual CP meetings and certificate courses. When Murtaza ji came with this program and then Lalit ji spoke to me, I was very keen that this should see the light of the day. Although there were certain conflict issues, I said no. When education comes, there should be no impediment at all. कहते हैं ना, हम चिरागों की भला कैसे हिफाजत करते, हम चिरागों की भला कैसे हिफाजत करते, ये वक्त तो सूरज को भी हर रोज बुझा देता है, लेकिन अगले दिन सुबह सूरज पूरे जलाल के साथ, पूरे शिद्दत के साथ दोबारा चमकता है और ये संदेशा देता है कि उजाले बांट देने से उजाले कम नहीं होते, उजाले बांट देने से उजाले कम नहीं होते. The basic purpose of the board is to ensure that we have to facilitate all people who want to be a part of dissemination of education and knowledge. Mentoring SMP has given us a platform. We have done so many programs. I'll give you some topics, you would enjoy them. One topic we did was internal audit of litigation process in income tax, internal audit of GST, internal audit of procurement, internal audit of IT industry, value add by chartered accountants, in internal audit of pharmaceuticals. We did all facets and we're in the process of doing. The basic purpose is when you reinforce knowledge, the people pick the pet and set up that as the very core practice area. And we want to reiterate presence of ICAISB by internal audit roundtables. We need to interact with regulators, with industries, and do outreach programs to ensure that things are on the right stream. I will discuss certain priority areas also with you. First is the robust regulatory mechanism. If the regulatory mechanism is clear, we are able to work in that tandem. Second is education and training. Very, very important. Third is bringing centers where people could come and express and exchange their views. We need to do advocacy and branding. Branding of internal audit is very, very important. If you go to government circles today, they are very keen that internal audit becomes an integral process of reporting. Excellence awards are again very important. How you give excellence awards to people who are working in bringing this to unprecedented heights. Internal audit legal framework in India. Section 138 of the Companies Act 2013 mandates internal audit. Moreover, if you go and look at CARO, that also wants internal audit. The clause 14 wants discussion in A and B of its subheads. Clause 49 of the listing agreement with respect to audit committee review of adequacy of internal audit, very, very important. Requirement of internal audit by stockbrokers and clearing members on half-yearly basis, which is mandated by the statute. Requirement of quarterly internal audit of insurance. And this list has to be long, very big, because I believe कि मालिक के खजाने में रहमतों की कमी नहीं, मालिक के खजाने में रहमतों की कमी नहीं, झांकना खुद की झोली में है कि कहीं कोई सुराग तो नहीं. We have to build our strongholds and walk on that, make our large practice members who are close to 2 lakh, 2.5 lakh to go and capture those areas. Essential characters of an internal auditor. He has to be impartial and open-minded. He has to be benevolent and considerate. I'm sorry, the structure of my PPT is not matching with the broadcast, but still, sir, I will carry on. So he has to be impartial, open-minded. He has to devise methods. He has to create strategies so that the management gets benefited. Today's times, whatever value add you make, therefore it is ever changing. You find internal auditors who work and change the entire system. It has to be benevolent and considerate to all the stakeholders, open and transparent. They have to be robust. They have to be ethical. So these are the essential characteristics of an internal auditor. Challenges for internal audit in global pandemic. The challenges are manifold, and very important challenge is understanding how we can put things forward. Technology is a very important facilitator, a very important enabler. We have called upon SMPs to embrace very candidly the technology, because ultimately now internal audit shall use technology in all its facets. And you see, all big and medium firms who are specializing in internal audit have a good impetus of technology. We need to lighten the dark path through internal audit. Very, very important. Please understand, there are so many issues. If I start discussing, I'll give 3-4 issues which will make your concept clear. Number one, sir, we have been doing so much internal audits. There is no specifically prescribed report of internal audits, and therefore internal audit largely have been driven by the practice units which undertake internal audits. How to write an internal audit report, how to showcase your audit findings. Second important thing, when you go through different facets and disciplines, what are the important areas which needs to be highlighted? Third, when you work, what are the desired objectives which you need? Fourth, when you report to audit committee, how do you bring fallacies and issues which the other senior management does not want to go before the audit committee? This is a big challenge. So you have to lighten the path through internal audit. Internal audit and automation evaluation, very, very important. You need to have a robotic process automation, which we call as RPA. Yes, robotic process automation is very important. I now speak only on technology. You also need remote internal auditing, very, very important. Remote audit, you see, we are governed, the entire accountancy bodies in the world, more than 150 are governed by IFAC, International Federation of Accountants. Pandemic stuck India officially. The close down started on 22nd or 23rd of March. And on 30th March, we were the first in the world, AASB, to give guidance on remote audit. How to use, what are the disclaimers you have to put in, how much relevance you have to put, what is the degree of assurance you have to give. India has become a leader into it. Cloud compounding in itself is a great enabler of technology. ERP systems with remote client server architecture, very, very important. Big data analyst, which is the mother of today's entire forensic systems. Yes, 60% of Indian corporate accounts are in espionage. We have to bring them out. We have to ensure how we can go ahead and help devise methods so that there is a proper value add to the boards. Artificial intelligence, how to use artificial intelligence. So we need analytical procedures, data analytics, CAT, computer assisted audit techniques, system walkthroughs, and configuration and intelligent audit using artificial intelligence, using robotic process automations and tools which put us at a parlance where we start determining and defining. Now, before I say goodbye to you, I have 2-3 more things to add. First, the board is holding concurrent audit courses. And in this pandemic alone, we trained more than 4,500 chartered accountants into the new senses of concurrent audit. Second, we want indulgence from all members across the country who want and return back to their alma mater. You can be a part of the board either in standard setting process or in writing industry general guides or in writing specific industry guides. And third and the final, we also look out for good speakers who could ultimately change the perspective of people. Now I will tell you how many we have. When we do programs, for virtual programs, you have either 1,500 or 2,500 membership. So when we announce the program, within 15 minutes, whether it is 1,500 or 2,500, the members are there. We keep a look on them for 3-hour programs also. Till the last, they are glued to the systems. Yes, we are very keen to ensure that the working of the board has to give confidence to people, to small and medium practitioners, so that they get involved and start adding value to the process of internal audit. But you need to understand one thing very much for people who are not into internal audit but intend to come to internal audit. The culprit says, "Thoda sa aur nikhar jaऊं, यही मैंने ठानी है. थोड़ा सा और निखर जाऊं, यही मैंने ठानी है. ऐ जिंदगी थोड़ा रुक, अभी हार कहां मानी है." हम तो जीतने वाले प्राणी हैं, जीतने वाली क्लास है. So to all chartered accountants, my message is it's a great area. I compliment the efforts of the WIRC, particularly the chairman and secretary. The secretary Murtaza is himself a very renowned internal auditor. We intend to see that it is percolated to all levels. All practicing people in small towns and mufsil towns are attracted towards internal audit because it has an immense, huge benefit and it has huge potentials in terms of professional opportunities. So I want to thank you all for giving me an opportunity to present my view before the entire WRC members. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for talking us through about the whole process of Internal Audit Standards Board, the work which has happened, the thought process which is happening, and I'm sure at least since I was involved, I know a lot of action is happening in the last 2 years, and we've seen a lot of things happening. And thank you very much for all those efforts. And we hope all the standards will be ready and lot more which we can do for the profession. We'll try to cover. Sir, we also taken your advice on conducting the program at various branches and taking it to the interior-most area. And the internal audit committee at WIRC for the year 2021 has taken up this responsibility. They have taken the lead, and we would share the draft program with you for your approval in a day or two. And once you finalize, we also request all the participants, anyone who is interested to be speaker, we can connect with Nandaji or the Internal Audit Standards Board or with us at WIRC, and I'm sure there will be a lot of opportunities when we are trying to organize programs at larger branches like Ahmedabad, Baroda, Pune on its own, and for smaller branches like maybe Surat, Vapi and Navsari could together and that types club together and join. So we'll have at least 4 to 8 programs in the next coming months across branches where like we'll need good speakers and we need to take it to that all the branches. So thank you, sir, once again, and a request.
We have to work in that tandem, sir. How do I remove my screen, sir?
Sir, there is one option where you don't need to just click or otherwise we will also do it. That is not a challenge.
Please do it. Please do it.
So thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Most welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Now I request
Great.
T.S. Sumit Doshi. He is also a part of our internal audit committee, and Sumit Doshi helped many people in doing the registration, joining, and he was very active over the last few days. Thank you, Sumit, for taking all the efforts for this program. And I request now Sumit to introduce the first speaker, technical speaker for this whole series and for today, CA Josefa Unwala. Sumit, over to you. Sumit, you are on mute, I think.
Good evening, respected and learned Central Council member and chairman of IASP HCI, sir, CA Lalit Bajaj sir, chairman WIRC, secretary and chairman of Internal Audit Committee of WIRC, C. Murtaza Kachwala sir, and my dear friends and colleagues. It's my indeed a pleasure and privilege to introduce today's speaker, C. Josefa Unwala sir, who will speak on standards on internal audit. Sir, Josefa sir is a practicing chartered accountant, and he is a senior partner at JHS and Associates LLP. With over 22 years of composite experience in service international large and medium-sized clients in an area of management consultancy, fraud investigations, internal audits, IT advisory, SOX and IFC implementation assistance, and enterprise risk management. Mr. Josefa Unwala sir currently leads a multi-skilled team of more than 150 people and is involved in a transformation of role at JHS. Prior to JHS, he was a partner and national head of risk advisory services practice of BDO in India. Mr. Josefa sir has also worked as a practice director, business risk services at Grant Corporate in India. So let's welcome Josefa Unwala sir. Thank you. And sir, I would like to thank you, Murtuza sir, for giving me such a nice, wonderful opportunity, and Lalit Bajaj sir for reposing trust on us. Thank you. Over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Sumit. Thank you very much for introducing me. Before I begin my session, just a quick sound check. Is my voice audible to everybody? Great.
Yes.
Yeah. So I would also like to thank the WRC organizing team, Chairman Lalit Bajaj, Secretary Murtuza Kachwala, for inviting me today for the session on a subject that is very close to my heart. And I'm very grateful to Nanda Saab for the opening remarks, which has made my life little simpler. As I was told that I'm the opening batsman, so there was a lot of burden on my shoulder. But Nanda Saab has done a quick cameo to make my life simpler. Thank you, sir, for the wonderful insights you gave as a precursor. The subject of the day is standards of internal audit, and of course, I will be talking about the standards and taking you all through the salient features of the standards. But let me put a context to the entire session before I get into my slides. Standards on internal audit, to me personally, are a set of standards which are very close to me, and I presume to all of us who are into internal audit profession. They come to our rescue time and again, and they have come to my rescue also time and again in several situations. And there are some little trade secrets which I will share with you. One is that, you know, when the client keeps on expanding the scope of work, because internal audit is a subject where it's very difficult to draw the boundary beyond a particular stage, because it's a function that is largely regarded as a management function today. Although there is so much of independence in the function, but still the management sometimes takes the liberties of, you know, requesting the internal auditor to go beyond the scope of work. So the standards are an amazing set of minimum guidelines that give you the quality benchmarks to draw the boundary with your clients, with your stakeholders as an independent professional. And that's what you know, it allows us to do very effectively. If you make a simple disclosure and if you adhere to the standards, and then you are in a position to educate the clients as well that you are adhering to a minimum set of criteria and benchmark, and you have to perform your services within that scope and within the minimum quality guidelines set by the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. The other, apart from rescuing and protecting the auditor, they also play a very important role in scaling up the audit fees. Because if you are following the standards in a particular manner to the last mile, I'm sure that, you know, the quality of your services is going to improve dramatically. And as a result of which, you know, you can also impress upon the client that, you know, since you're following a minimum set of standards and benchmark, the level of time and quality that goes into an internal audit engagement, you know, definitely improves over a period of time. That's my personal experience. So we don't end up executing assignments in great rush and urgency. We have the opportunity to look back at our work, at our working papers and our scope of work, our letters, and to see whether we have adhered and complied with the standards. If not, then, you know, we go back to the table and start ensuring that, you know, we have kind of complied with these minimum set of quality benchmarks and standards. And lastly, as internal audit professions, in each of our audit reports, we give a certain set of criteria against which we make a commentary. So like if we write a statement in an audit report which is pertaining to non-compliance with a particular section or a particular area of law, we quote that in our audit report and say that the management has not complied with so and so XYZ section, subset and so forth. So while we do so in our internal audit observations, it is incumbent upon us that if someone were to review our output, what would be the criteria for that? So there has to be a performance benchmark to review the internal auditor's work, especially in the context of the New Companies Act, the provisions, the transformed standards on internal audit, and the onerous responsibilities cast upon the internal audit professionals by the fact that the statutory auditors, the audit committees rely on the work of the internal auditors. So at any stage, at any point in time, if we have to look back on our own work, on our own reports, there has to be a yardstick to evaluate our performance. So unless we adhere to these minimum set of quality guidelines and standards, it will become very difficult for any other agency, whether it's a peer reviewer or whether it's an audit committee or whether it's an incoming internal auditor who has replaced us as a resigning outgoing auditor. It will become very difficult for us to demonstrate that we have done a quality job. So to demonstrate that effectively, it's important that we adhere to these minimum set of criteria and benchmarks. So these are the three things that personally I believe is crucially important while we set the context for this session to manage your audit risks effectively, to impress upon the client that since you are adhering to minimum set of standards, the quality and the output of your service is going to enhance dramatically, as a result of which you are able to then impress upon the client that there could be a case for a fee revision. And third is to set your own standards of benchmark and yardstick so that you can continuously improve and you can demonstrate compliances and minimum performance benchmarks to external agency for any kind of a requirement, whether it's a quality assurance review, a peer audit, or a incoming new internal auditor. Now I'll jump into the slides that I've prepared for the session. I hope my screen is visible to all of you all. Yeah, Sumit, it's visible, no, I believe.
Sir, yes, sir.
All right, great. So the background is perfectly set up by Nanda Saab, so I'll not delve more into the background. Only thing that these standards are yet to be notified by the council. However, the council has also put in the preface and the framework to the standards certain important disclosures that these standards would apply to auditors of listed entities and to all other entities after a year or so. The major revamp of the standards have happened in the year 2018-19 when a fresh of new standards were released, and prior to that the old standards were in vogue, which were formulated and disclosed in the year 2013. So basically there is a complete overhaul in terms of the standards on internal audit in the last couple of years. And the standards also draw references to the legal requirements of the Companies Act as well as certain global standards such as COSO. Standards are a compilation of best practices in each of the areas of the practice unit, whether it is planning, whether it is managing the audit function, whether it is organizing the internal audit mission, chalking out the engagement letter, or writing an audit report, or giving an assurance to the board and to the stakeholders. Each and every facet of internal audit activity has been captured in a succinct, crisp manner and in line with international and global best practices. So it's a great compilation for any new entrants to the profession. Even for the old practitioners, it's a very good reference to continuously improve their performance. And as the keynote speaker has already said, that the standards are divided into several series, like series 100, 200, 300, 500, and 600. 100 deals with key concepts such as definitions and key items like internal audit definition, internal control definition, etc., and so forth. Then you have internal audit management under the 200 series, which talks about planning, and it talks about the framework governing internal audit. Then 300 talks about the actual process execution framework for the internal audit activities, 500 about specialized areas, and 600 about other topics which are yet to be released. This is the dashboard of the count or summary of the standards. So as on 1st July 2013, we had about 18 standards that were in vogue. Subsequently, 4 got deleted and 7 new were added last year. So the total count is about 21 standards, out of which about 6 have been modified, and 8 standards have not yet been modified or revised. Standards that have been added include nature of assurance, internal control, managing the internal audit function, conducting overall internal audit planning, objective of internal audit, review and supervision of audit assignment. This standard is particularly relevant for partners, chief audit executives, head of audit functions, and lastly, monitoring and reporting of prior audit issues, which is popularly known as the action taken report in the internal audit parlance. So these are the standards that have been added, and my endeavor will be today to take you through the new standards that have been added, and if time permits, also to introduce the old standards and the key themes around the old standards. Standards that have been merged and deleted include basic principles governing internal audit, terms of internal audit engagement, internal control evaluation, and knowledge of entity and its environment. Although these 4 standards have been deleted, they have largely been referred to as well as added to the other standards, the new standards that have been introduced. So in effect, actually the good work of the previous standards has been carried forward. In principle, there is nothing critical that has been deleted. There are only additions and modifications. This is the overall summary of the standards broken down into various series that we discussed in the previous slides. Like there are 2 standards on key concepts: nature of assurance, internal control, internal audit management, managing the internal audit function, conducting overall internal audit planning, objective of the internal audit, and so forth. Standards that remain unchanged so far are on sampling, analytical procedures, quality assurance in internal audit, consideration of fraud in an internal audit, enterprise risk management, internal audit in information technology environment, consideration of laws and regulations in internal audit, and related party transactions. Now, before we get into the content of each and every standard, what I've done is that I have created a summary of 2 slides to take you through the key concepts that are pronounced in the standards on internal audit in a summarized manner, so that you are able to then take these short takeaways from all the standards and all the contents that are to be discussed today. So these are the key takeaways, or you can call it like the executive summary of standards on internal audit. I've called it the key matters pertaining to standards on internal audit. So each of the matter listed here on the slide, there are about 20 to 21 items here that is listed on the slide are very, very important for us to take a note of and to put it in action in our day-to-day internal audit activities, whether it is chalking out our scope and our letter of engagement with the client, or demonstrating a continuous improvement process. So the first item that pertains to the code of ethics as well as the basic framework governing internal audit is on the subject of independence. So the standards require that the audit function and the internal audit activity should be clearly free of any conflicting situation, and the auditors should be independent while they make a commentary on any audit subject or any subject matter on which they are going to draw a conclusion. So it's very critical to take a note of this. So many times it so happens, especially in in-house audit functions, where there is a rotation policy and somebody would be rotated from say a IT function or a treasury function into the audit function, as a result of which there is likelihood of some kind of a conflict if that person takes up any audit activity of the erstwhile function. So keeping that in mind, and also from a perspective of independent firms executing audit activity, they should demonstrate a complete arm's length and independence. That is what is pronounced as one of the key requirements Second is nature of assurance. So this is a big change and departure from the previous practices that we were following in the internal audit profession. The standard on nature of assurance 110 clearly requires the internal audit function to distinguish between a situation where the internal auditor has to provide a written assurance or opinion on a subject matter vis-a-vis it's a general purpose review report or a agreed upon procedure review report. The auditor should be very clear in his mind that there should be some kind of a subject matter which needs to be commented upon. So here, to give you a practical example, say in case if the internal auditor is asked to do audit of the payroll function. If the payroll process and the payroll function is audited by the internal auditor to provide a general purpose review commentary, then he would just simply put a high, medium, low rating report and provide that to the management as part of the reporting process. However, if the management desires and the internal auditor is very clear that there is a requirement of a audit opinion, then the nature of assurance will be completely different. And the standard 110 clearly says that there are 3-4 criteria on the basis of which the internal auditor should formulate his opinion. So the first is that there should be 3 elements. Those elements are that there should be an auditor, auditee, and there should be an assurance user. Assurance user could be a stakeholder like an audit committee, a board, or some external agency like a regulator who is demanding this kind of assurance. Second requirement is a subject matter. So in the current example that we took of payroll, so the subject matter could be a system change in the payroll process, or it could be the payroll output, or it could be the outsourced payroll activity. So there could be any kind of a subject matter, and the auditor should be very clear in the scope of the report that what is the subject matter that is given to him on which he has to formulate an audit opinion. Then there should be a predefined criteria against which the auditor is going to give his opinion. So the predefined criteria could be in the form of a checklist or in the form of a specific compliance requirement under the law, or it could be in the form of some kind of a risk and control matrix discussed with the management beforehand, that this is the kind of testing that will happen, and the audit opinion would be based on this specific methodology and the checklist and the predefined criteria. And lastly, the report should, if it has to be a report on assurance, then it should give a conclusive opinion, a conclusive view, a conclusive summary from the auditor's desk that what is his conclusion, whether he opines that there is sufficient and appropriate evidence that he has reviewed, and he concludes and gives a positive assurance, gives a negative assurance. So that specific commentary is very much required in terms of a conclusive opinion from the auditor's desk. So this is a big departure. Now we have been used to issuing standardized internal audit reports in the past. So it's advisable for all of us to seek consultation with the chair of the audit committee, or to seek consultation with the key sponsor, audit sponsor, or the CEO's office to actually set the expectations correct, that what the organization really wants is in the form of assurance, or it wants a general purpose internal audit report. That is all laid out in the standard. The other key item laid out in the standard on nature of assurance is that internal audit activity is, of course, having limitations from a sampling perspective. So we cannot give an absolute assurance. We can only give a reasonable assurance, or we can give a limited assurance. So these are two key important items mentioned in the standard. The third important element here, going beyond nature of assurance standard, is of course knowing the knowledge of having sufficient knowledge of the client business. Very important to understand the KYC elements before onboarding the client and while we are signing up the mandate or we are about to begin the execution. chalking out internal audit charter, communication protocols, roles and responsibilities, and the audit committee oversight. Now, popularly, internal auditing activity is referred to as an activity that is the eye and ear of the audit committee. So, and the audit committee specifically is tasked with the responsibility of overseeing internal auditors, planning, functioning, periodicity, capabilities, performance, and so forth under the Companies Act. So it's critical that there is appropriate audit charter laid down, approved by the chair of the audit committee, along with the head of the audit function, as well as the entire roles and responsibilities, the level of escalations, the vision of the internal audit function, and so forth. The letter of engagement and terms of contract, again, very, very important, considering the current pandemic and the manner in which the audit execution would happen. All the appropriate terms and conditions should be suitably reproduced in the letter of engagement. If time permits, we'll get into the detailing of that as well. The type of report that the auditor issues, whether it's a limited purpose report, it's a limited assurance report, it's a reasonable assurance report, or it's a report which is a general purpose internal audit review report. So the contents and the format of the report have been discussed with the discussed in the standards of internal audit very, very clearly, laying down that what the format and the content would be. The resourcing plan of the audit function, again, the standards require that while we manage the activities of the internal audit function, the resourcing plan should be sufficiently documented in terms of the competencies, the profile of people, the risk priorities, etc. The entire auditing activity, whether it is planning, whether it is sampling, execution, reporting, disclosures, etc., should be risk-based audit planning and monitoring as per the standards requirements. Analytical review procedures, this standard has not undergone a change, and I'm sure that with the transformation that is happening in the IT environment, business environment, and also in the audit profession, this standard would undergo a change quickly, perhaps in the next 6 months. Internal auditors should be sensitive to multiple stakeholder needs. So we should recognize the fact that internal audit activities is a very important activity, and the commentary of the internal auditor can impact businesses, can impact going concern, status of the entity, can impact multiple stakeholders, including the board, the shareholders, and the vendors, the customers, the employees. So internal auditors should be sensitive to the output that they are producing and should be a responsible output. Internal audit activities are largely used up and consumed by stakeholders for making key decisions. So considering all these things, the standards mention that the internal auditor should have taken cognizance of these critical items like sensitivity of multiple stakeholders and the fact that internal audit reports are used for key decision-making purpose. So accuracy of internal audit activity, factual accuracy is very, very important, and the standards demand that we pursue a minimum set of quality benchmarks. Then the standards also demand risk assessment around the subject of frauds. The standards make it compulsory for the internal audit team to do a fraud risk assessment, keeping in mind the typical sectoral risk profile in which the company operates. So if the company is operating in the banking environment, or is a non-banking finance company, or is a manufacturing company, so what are the typical fraud risks that are prevalent in the sector or have occurred in the last couple of years? The internal auditor is duty bound to basically review those fraud risk factors in his working papers and see the impact of that on his work, and to evaluate the fraud risk factors. Whether he's required to do that as part of the audit scope, signed scope of work, or not required to do that, formally from the client side, but the standards recommend that the fraud risk assessment should be done by the internal auditors. The internal auditor should be cognizant of information technology, the computing environment in which the business is running, and what are the technology related risk factors. Now, given the context of cloud computing, work from home, etc. So the internal audit activity should be aligned to these new developments, and they should take cognizance of technology environment and the changes that are happening that could impact the internal auditor's work and his output. So the standards require that the internal auditor should look at all these facets, and also while he's placing reliance on several key information items which he is using for processing the audit report, technology and automated computing and the controls that operate in the technology environment should be reviewed by the internal auditor sufficiently so that he can draw conclusions in his audit output. Sampling, there's a standard on sampling which again says that all the methods that are popularly used by the auditors and internal auditors in particular are captured by the sampling standard, laying down that the auditor should do representative sampling, stratified sampling, and so forth to develop the entire universe. And where possible, wherever possible, the auditor could do 100% database check recommended. Legal compliance assessment and checklist, there is a specific standard on consideration of laws and the regulatory environment. Again, something similar to the fraud risk standard, where it is mandatory for the internal auditor, whether it is part of his scope of work or no, documented and signed off by the management or no, he should look at all the applicable compliances and laws, and then kind of make a commentary in his working paper and then reproduce it in the audit report if it is part of his terms of engagement and the scope of work. But a mandatory listing of applicable laws and verification of compliances is important as part of the working paper and as part of the overall internal audit execution. Many times we have practical situations where we say that this was not part of the scope of work. But as far as laws and compliances are concerned, the standards are very clear. They say that as far as legal implications are concerned, the internal auditor is duty bound to check all the applicable compliances and document that as part of the working papers. Competent personnel and use of external experts is another topic which the standards have dealt with in great detail in different areas, where it says that the audit function should be resourced through competent and qualified personnel to carry out the internal audit activity. And wherever there is use of external experts, in those situations, the head of audit, the chief audit officer, executive should evaluate the competence of the expert, should evaluate whether there is proper independence in the functioning of the external expert, and the external expert is able to complete the scope of work that has been awarded to him in a proper and a timely manner. The standard on related party transactions has not undergone a change, but it's the old standard itself is a very comprehensive standard, and in the current context of the frauds and the significant deficiencies that we generally observe in the business environment, this standard is crucially important, where the internal auditor is duty bound to comment on the related party transaction in terms of arm's length, in terms of approvals of several authority layers such as audit committees, etc. So whether related party transactions are sufficiently documented, they are at arm's length, they have followed a proper sequence of approval and authorization, and so forth, has to be reviewed by the internal auditors. Monitoring of prior period items and continued control deficiencies is something that is again a key matter in the standards, and there is a standard dedicated to monitoring prior period items, which clearly says that the internal auditor should not take the action taken on face value, but actually evaluate whether they have been implemented before giving a summary to the audit committee or to the consumers of the audit report. So merely just taking a factual feedback from the client that they have complied with the audit recommendations and observations may not hold good. We should actually verify the effectiveness of the implementation of the audit observations and recommendations, and also see whether they have been implemented in a timely manner or no, and what are the open risks on account of unimplemented audit observations and recommendations that could cause continuing control deficiencies. Even the listing requirement, listing obligation and disclosure requirements have specific mention of certifications from the CEO and CFO side on continuing control deficiencies, and they have to be evaluated appropriately for impact on the financial statements and impact on internal financial controls. Then the standards also lay emphasis on working paper management, on filing, documentation, sufficient backups, evidence maintenance, etc. And lastly, if there is a material departure from any of the standard on internal audit, it has to be appropriately disclosed in the report by the internal auditor. So one is confirmation to the standards, which is very important to be reported. And if there is a material departure, now material departure could happen on account of a variety of factors. Either the management may say that you have to, as part of the scope of work, kind of keep this particular item out, or because of some sensitive reason, it has to be excluded from the scope of work on account of which there is a material departure, like say in case of legal compliances, or in case of IT considerations, or if there is a regulatory requirement which may change the content of the audit exercise, on account of which there could be a material departure. So such material departures have to be adequately disclosed as per the new standards and the new framework on internal audit. So this is a broad high-level summary of 20 items which we can keep in mind and keep in focus while we talk of standards on internal audit, so that we don't deviate from these 20 line items. And now I'll quickly run you through all these line items in terms of the actual content of the standards on internal audit. Before I do that, let me quickly just ask a question or take a poll, if possible. So the poll is open here. The question is in front of you. Work from home does not require modification of charters and appointment terms. True or false? Could somebody just help me with the results?
So 65% is false and 35% is true.
So I think the majority is right. This is a false statement, where work from home does require modification of charters and appointment terms, because in the current context, confidentiality of information is one critical item as far as our ethics and our standards are concerned, where we have to maintain sufficient confidentiality of information. And as part of terms of reference, our entire letters of engagement, IA charters, the protocols for information exchange will have to be modified. Keeping that in background, we will have to modify the charters and appointment terms. Okay. Now let's quickly look at the new standards that have been pronounced by the Auditing Standards Board. The first one is on nature of assurance. So as I mentioned to you and described to you in the summary slides, this is the most critical change from the previous environment that we were functioning. From a reporting perspective, the internal auditor under standard 110 has to now make a choice on what he's going to actually write down in his audit communication and audit report, whether he is going to give an audit opinion or whether he is going to continue giving a general purpose internal audit report. So when he has to give a specific audit opinion, an audit opinion can be either a reasonable opinion or a limited opinion. In most of the cases, it will be a reasonable opinion because we can not give a 100% absolute opinion because we do a limited purpose sampling. So while we issue a reasonable opinion, we should be very clear that we should be having a three-way party relationship involving an auditor, auditee, as well as an assurance user. Presence of three key elements involving a subject matter, predefined criteria, and our ability to give a conclusive outcome. So if we are not in a position to give a conclusive outcome, it would be difficult for us to issue an assurance report. And undertaking an assurance assignment, while we do so, we should keep in mind the ethical requirements of independence, our competence to give an assurance opinion. Like say, for example, if you have to give an assurance opinion on the gratuity provision of an organization. So do we need a subject matter expert? Do we need an actuarial expert in our team? Or we have to conclude on a cyber security matter? Are we sufficiently resourced? Do we have those capabilities to conclude on a cyber security matter? Do we have the subject matter expertise or no? So we should evaluate it from our own perspective in terms of our capabilities, our competence, our independence to the situation, and then reach a conclusion whether we really can give an assurance report or we should continue giving a general purpose report. The assurance report should exhibit subject matter, whether it is sufficiently defined. Like I gave you an example of payroll, it could be a change of system in payroll, it could be upgradation of the payroll computation software, or it could be outsourced activity, and the predefined criteria as well in terms of the risk and control matrice, the checklist, or the legal framework. So whatever is the predefined criteria, it should be clearly documented, and we should be in a position to arrive at sufficient and appropriate audit evidence to support our conclusive opinion. Let me quickly take another poll here. Now, the chief audit executive, while appointing a subject matter expert for outsourcing an audit mission, is not required to check his independent status. True or false?
So 90% is false and 10% is true.
Excellent, good. I think it's a false statement because whenever the audit executive is evaluating the appointment of a subject matter expert, he or she should definitely evaluate not only the competence but also the independence of the subject matter expert to the particular audit mission as per the standard. So now we come to the standard on internal control. This is also a critical new standard 120 that has been introduced, which defines the subject of internal control. The standard talks about internal control. Yeah.
So can you share your screen? You can't see the screen.
Okay. Visible now?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So the standard on internal control is a welcome addition where see the basic definition of internal audit that has undergone a change says that internal auditors are required to evaluate the internal controls as well as the risk management processes of the organizations as per the new standards. So it was only fit that the term internal controls also defined so that this is the main subject matter of audit for internal auditors. So it has been defined as sequential steps of activities to evaluate risks arising out of financial accounting and disclosures, out of operational processes, as well as out of procedures to ensure compliance with the laws of the land. So internal audit, internal control basically comprises of three key elements to evaluate the design and the effectiveness of legal compliances, to check and evaluate aspects and risk matters pertaining to financial accounting and disclosures, and lastly operational processes. It also has put in place a diagram to expand the definition of internal control. So the first set is internal control over financial reporting in the diagram, and the next is added to that is operational controls. Both put together is internal financial controls, and then it also includes entity level controls. Entity level controls are the higher level of controls such as policies, and all put together we arrive at the term internal control, and underlying that are multiple process level controls, and the overall control environment constitutes the internal control system. So the standard now comprehensively defines the term internal control, and we as internal auditors are now duty bound to look at the subject of internal controls that is enumerated in the diagram here as part of our internal audit activities. And then the standard also describes various linkages to the ICO-FR legal requirements on the Companies Act, the CE/CFO certificate requirement, and the company's requirement section 143, where the statutory auditor has to comment on the adequacy of the internal financial control system. Here the standard makes it very clear that the audit procedures to be conducted would primarily be directed over high and medium risk based activities and adequate documentation in terms of risk and control metrics. So traditionally we are used to a checklist approach in internal audit where traditionally internal auditors devise a checklist. Now the standards require that there should be a risk and control metrics that should be made as part of each and every audit subject matter, and the control should be evaluated in the prism of risk-based controls and risk-based auditing. So the next fact check is on audit documentation. Let's start this poll. Audit documentation can be prepared within 3 months / days of audit closure. You can eliminate the word days. You can only focus on audit documentation can be prepared within 3 months of audit closure. Is it true or false?
So approximately 70% says false and roughly 30% says true.
Okay, so this is definitely a false statement where audit documentation can be prepared within 3 months. So the standard very clearly says, the standard on internal audit documentation that says that working papers and key internal audit documentation should be prepared prior to the release of the final report. So it cannot wait the issuance of final report and subsequently. So the standards clearly mention that all the audit documentation and working papers should be actually put in place before an internal auditor issues the final report, and only due to administrative reasons or delays, if there are administrative actions that are required from a documentation perspective, so there is a window of 60 days that is given post issuance of report. So if you put both the things together, maximum you have a 2-month window to prepare the audit documentation and not beyond that. But preferably the audit documentation and the file, digital file or physical file, whatever you are used to preparing, should be prepared before the issuance of the final report. Then the next standard 210 is on managing the internal audit function. Here the critical aspects pertain to demonstrating how the internal audit function is going to be managed in terms of having a documented resourcing plan for the internal audit function in terms of the key skills, competencies that are going to be hired internally, externally, the number of audit missions and assignments to be executed based on the risk priorities of the organization, and whether the internal audit function has put in place a formal quality evaluation and improvement program and plan. So all these aspects come into the standard of managing audit function, that is 210. I'll skip this slide in terms of the waterfall of activities for the audit functioning. Leave it back with your slides. Next is conducting the internal audit function. So this standard goes into the detail of the nitty-gritties of how you would conduct the entire internal audit planning and what are the key elements. So it talks about basically the entire audit universe, risk assessment, scoping for the audit activity, the methodology, the depth of coverage, and so forth. The planning related aspects in internal audit. So primarily it covers obtaining knowledge of the business, establishing the audit universe, objectives of the engagement, scope of the engagement, resource allocation, audit plan. I'm sure that there is a learned speaker tomorrow who is going to take you through this in detail. So I'll skip all these slides. Next is on objectives of internal audit. So objectives of internal audit in the background of the new standards, very clear. Two primary components to be evaluated: internal control as well as risk management procedures to see the design and effectiveness. The standard on objective of internal audit also requires us to document the formation and functioning of internal audit activity, provide clarity of the internal auditor and stakeholders regarding the nature of assurance to be given, linkages of the audit output and the key expectations, and so forth. So one of the key requirements is that of an internal audit charter that should be prepared, and the internal audit charter should be reviewed continuously, and the components of the internal audit charter have been laid out. So these are the key components of the internal audit charter. Mission and vision of the internal audit function, purpose and objectives of internal audit, reporting structure, independence, scope and approach, accountability, authority, roles, responsibilities, quality assurance, and confirm. So there is a very detailed annexure along with detailed explanations. So it's almost like a ready-made internal audit charter which can be just picked up from the standards and can be customized by audit functions, keeping in mind their current set of realities. This is another important component in 230, which is on the format of the engagement letter and the typical outline of the engagement letter. It should have the purpose, objectives of the audit very clearly defined in terms of compliance objectives, management objectives, efficiency objectives, financial reporting objectives. So there are multiple objectives that are part of the internal audit activity. The engagement letter should also describe independence, objectivity, scope, approach, accountability, authority, roles, responsibilities, limitations, and confidentialities. Limitations in particular in case of remote auditing, like there are certain documents that are not readily available in work from home scenario, like say title of tangible assets to be verified, or a particular expense voucher that you may like to verify. So in remote audits, many times it so happens that you are not able to lay your hands on the last piece of evidence. So what are the limitations, and from a confidentiality perspective also, there could be situations where you would like to disclaim like if there is a uncontrollable hacking event or a cyber crime which is beyond your control. So in the non-disclosure agreement, you can definitely make a mention of that. So whatever is controllable and within your control, you are able to control your activities. To that extent, you can organize yourself and you can diligently offer that to the client. But something that goes beyond your control or activity or your function, it could impact your performance, and your terms of engagement have to be very properly defined and legally vetted. Quality assurance and conformance with SIAs, reporting and compensation, milestones, ownership of working papers. Nowadays, the audit function is a function that generates a lot of data dashboards in which you do data analytics on the client environment and you generate reports, smart reports, and they form part of the dashboard reporting. So in such a situation, how you would protect your own legal interest and how you would document that as part of your working papers, and how you would retrieve those working papers and store that back in your office environment, and ownership of that is very critical. So the typical engagement letter should cover all these aspects. And of course, lastly, termination of arrangement. So in case of resignation or termination, how it would work out. So all these are salient features of the engagement letter as required by the standards that need to be put in place by the auditors before starting the audit mission and activities. We've covered using the work of experts sufficiently before, so I'll skip this. Planning the internal audit assignment. So this also I'll skip this. I think there is a dedicated session tomorrow on this subject. Broadly, from a planning process chart perspective, we could look at these elements which are described in 310. The audit calendar, audit program, then development of the risk and control metrics, the checklist, then a fraud risk assessment, a design questionnaire, then the information requirement list and trackers, parallelly analytical procedures, sampling guidelines for the partner, and then release of the entire audit plan. This is on the internal audit evidence. So here, as we are all aware, even in terms of our statutory audit lexicon, there is a concept of sufficient and appropriate evidence. So sufficient is basically the quantity and appropriate is the quality. So we should gather sufficient evidence to ensure that our basis of opinion is appropriately, suitably having some kind of a foundation on which we are going to be reporting. If we don't have sufficient number of evidences and samples to draw, conclusion would become very difficult and would go against our interest. So what the standard requires is, you do a confirmation on the nature, timing, and sufficiency of audit procedures and evidences that we are collecting, and also the appropriate level of evidence that needs to be commented, commented upon. So as a matter of good practice, always I would like to follow, and I would like to recommend also that I follow and recommend to all of you all is to disclose the sampling plan as an annexure as part of the audit report, and disclose it to the audit committee, so that there is no confusion or there is no doubt in anybody's mind in terms of the level of evidence that you carry in your audit report. So you have sufficiently transparently disclosed that how many items were verified and what is the result of that. These are some basic techniques, so I'll skip this slide. Then we go to internal audit documentation. So again, it's all about linking back your final report to the working paper, to the final set of evidences, whether it is a trial balance or whether it is a debtor's reconciliation statement or a bank reconciliation statement. So your documentation should be a document that should be a living document in your audit file, which should be able to create linkages top down or bottom up if someone were to review it. It should be a comprehensive document, and it should be made in a timely manner before issuance of the audit report. The basic outline of internal audit documentations as per the standard, it includes audit charters, plans, evidences, engagement letters, etc. And of course, the working papers. This standard is very relevant for the senior professionals in the audience who are tasked with the responsibility of reviewing work of their juniors, like say who are partners in audit firms, or who are the signing partners for audit reports, whether head of audits or chief executives. So there's a very detailed chart given in terms of supervision and review responsibilities in this standard 350, and the chart also describes the level of activities at each stage of the internal audit process, whether it is at the planning process, whether it is at the execution process, documentation, reporting, disclosure, etc. So at each stage, even at the stage of sampling, what is the responsibility cast on the senior professional to review the work of the junior, to supervise, and then to ensure that there is adequate improvement in the process. So this is a critical standard for all the senior professionals to look into, and one of the key elements is the way the entire audit activity is going to be documented in the form of a manual or a standard operating procedure against which the review and supervision is going to be carried out. Let's go to one more poll quickly. Internal auditor's job includes identification of liabilities, true or false?
So audience 60% says true and 40% false.
Okay. So this is a true statement. Internal auditor's job includes identification of liabilities. It definitely includes verification of assets and liabilities, and identification of liabilities as part of the financial accounting and disclosure objectives under internal audit, and the risk mitigation activities that the internal auditor is tasked with. He is primarily responsible for identification and verifying the existing liabilities. In the event that the internal auditor cannot identify a particular liability, or there is material uncertainty in the process of identification of liabilities, like say contingent liabilities. Nowadays, many companies are experiencing defaults in their debt obligations, in their banking obligations, as well as in their business relationships. So in that kind of a situation, if the internal auditor is not able to identify liabilities and there is material uncertainty, there is a concept called disclosure of essential information. So the internal auditor, as part of the standard on communication, the internal auditor has to give a essential information disclosure in the form of a recital in his internal audit report in terms of the material uncertainty on account of which he is not able to identify liabilities. So this is the standard on communication with management. So this standard,
sir, we can't. If you can share your slides again.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. It's visible now. Is it visible?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it is visible.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So this standard is a critical standard in today's business environment. It talks about devising and designing appropriate communication protocols with the management and with the auditees. In the current context, it's very important because it talks about written communication protocols. It talks about protocols for actually communicating with the management while you are engaging with them, while you are executing internal audit activity. So now let's take example of the current context. In the current context, we are all doing remote auditing, we are doing work from home. In this kind of a situation, we are using collaborative tools like Zoom, we are using so many other collaborative tools, and we are remotely accessing the servers of our client premises. So what are the communication channels that are approved by the client as part of the audit charter and the engagement activity? How we are going to be communicating, what is the level of security mechanism, how the authentication is going to happen between our infrastructure, the audit team's infrastructure, and the client's infrastructure and the servers. So all these things get covered by this standard on communication. So it's very relevant in today's day and age, where we set suitable communication channels and protocols in terms of verbal and written communication with the management. And it also talks about disclosure of essential information that we discussed in the previous slides. So there are various forms of communication: structured presentations, report, less structured communications, including discussions, timing of communications, significance of findings in the internal audit exercise, and so forth. So there are number of matters to be considered as per the standard, and we can take cognizance of this standard and appropriately factor that in our work. This one is on reporting results. So the mandatory items in reporting results include objective, scope, approach, and methodology, whether the internal audit has been conducted in accordance with the standards of the internal audit, executive summary of key observations, summary of the corrective actions required, the level of assurance that the auditor is going to give, very clearly to be outlined in this as per this standard, whether it's a reasonable assurance, limited assurance, or whether it's not an assurance report, a general purpose review report, which is on the basis of high, medium, low ratings. And if it's a conclusive outcome where the nature of assurance is a written assurance report, then the high, medium, low ratings can support the conclusion of the audit exercise. However, they are not comprehensive to give a full-blown conclusion. In addition to the ratings, high, medium, low ratings, the auditor should also devise a methodology by virtue of which he can conclude on the audit assurance opinion that he desires to give on the basis of a defined risk and control matrix or a defined checklist for verification of the subject matter and the criteria that is described in the report. So a high, medium, low rating report is only an indicative guidance to reach a particular conclusion as per the standards. However, it is not sufficient for you to reach an audit conclusion by merely issuing a high, medium, low risk rated report. Then this standard is on monitoring of prior period items. Quickly, this standard talks about proper monitoring and closure of open items from prior periods, independent validation of corrective actions taken by the auditee, escalation of any concerns in case of delays in closure of these open items, and timely reporting of status of those the status of these open items to those charged with governance. So it could be the CEO's office, CFO's office, it could be the audit committee, the board of directors. It also talks about laying down escalation procedures. When the internal auditor observes delay in the agreed time schedule for implementation, the internal auditor shall intimate the auditee and agree to a new time schedule. On further delays in timelines of implementation, the internal auditor shall escalate details of delays to management as per pre-agreed escalation protocol. Now, you should also remember, while you adhere compliance to this standard, there is a requirement under the listing requirement with the stock exchanges that the CEO and CFO issue certificates to the board of directors annually on internal controls, internal financial controls, or financial reporting. Now, one of the line items in this certificate is on continuing control deficiencies. So they are responsible, the CEO's office is responsible for ensuring that there are no continuing control deficiencies. And if they continue, then they can actually become significant deficiencies or material weaknesses if these open risk items are not addressed. So you can clearly draw linkages to this current standard as well as the listing agreement and requirement. and form a viewpoint and then escalate it sufficiently. This standard has not undergone a change, so it's the old standard. So I'll quickly just skip the slides. Analytical procedures also not undergone a change. This standard also remains same. Consideration of fraud also remains the same. There's no change in this standard. But it's an important standard for internal auditors because one is that the revised CARO now has got 40 line items. So I would just like to quickly share that with you if time permits. Is the screen visible?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So this is a quick comparison for everybody on the new CARO standard. Now see the onerous responsibilities cast on the internal auditors. Where the erstwhile CARO had 20 line items, there are 22 additions. And the additions are around borrowing, loans, advances, around whistleblowing, around unaccounted income, willful default, fraud, and several other areas. So in all, we have around 41 line items. And one of the key line items added here is on internal audit, where specifically the statutory auditor has to comment whether the internal audit is commensurate with the size and structure and requirements of the business, and as well as on all the other items that have been added here, the statutory auditor is going to rely on the internal auditor's efforts, and the management also is going to rely on the internal auditor's efforts. So most of the large organizations are now changing the terms of reference for their internal auditors to include review of willful default related matters, to include review of whistleblowing items, to review solvency related ratios, to review consolidated financial statements. Specifically, a line item added here is that if there is a qualification on the subsidiaries financial statements, then at the consolidated level also the auditor has to take that into account. So there are a number of onerous responsibilities cast on the statutory auditors, and that is naturally going to percolate down to the internal auditors, while they place reliance on internal auditors' work. So the standard on fraud considerations has gained a lot of significance and importance. This is also the old standard. I will quickly skip the standards. Technology consideration also is a old standard, but the key item here from a technology standpoint is definitely the backup and business continuity aspect in the current business environment, which the internal auditors definitely will have to look at. And also the entire business environment has changed, and like say for example the dealing room operations in treasury function, where no more the dealing room operations are being done from the front offices, but in a work from home scenario, the entire setup of monitoring, recording of deals has undergone a change. So there is so much of change that has happened in the business environment, and technology is in the forefront of facilitating not only business but facilitating audit also. So the potential for errors, irregularities, arithmetical accuracy of accounting balances, shadow and end user computing outside the main business systems, lack of transaction trails, etc., backup and continuity related aspects. All these critical matters have to be considered by the internal auditor, sufficiently documented in their working papers to see the impact on their output. And of course, use of computer assisted auditing techniques like robotic process automation or use of data analytical tools that are capable of generating exception reports and serving it in a dashboard format to the management. So in this kind of a situation, the internal auditor is tasked with the responsibility to verify the effectiveness and the accuracy of the results that are presented to the management, basis which the management is going to take critical decisions. So on the technology risk side, confidentiality, effectiveness, integrity, availability, compliance with various statutes, etc. has to be seen. And from an outsourced information processing standpoint, the internal auditor should review the outsourcing activities, look at relevant standards. There is a standard 3402, which is a sister standard to be looked at for outsourcing operations, etc. And considerations of laws and regulations in internal audit. So as I mentioned in my summary slide, again, a critical standard where the internal auditor is duty bound to look at all situations that may result in fines, litigation, other consequences such as it could be arrest of the promoters and so forth. Has to look at all the applicable compliances and has to document that sufficiently to check whether those compliances apply and have been appropriately dealt with by the management team or no. This is the primary responsibility of the management. However, the internal auditor is tasked with the responsibility of reviewing the compliances with the laws of the land, whether it is part of the audit scope or it is not part of the audit scope. Clearly, the standard says that the auditor has to sufficiently review the level of compliances and document it as part of his audit working papers. So here, the framework to auditing and few preceding standards clearly say that when the auditor has to give an assurance opinion to the management, and if compliance is a subject matter, the standards require that the internal auditor should rely upon a self-assessment checklist and a self-certification process by the management, without which the auditor should not give out a assurance audit opinion. So there should be a system of compliance and self-certification and management certification, without which an assurance opinion should not be issued by the internal auditor. So that comes to our rescue. We should ensure that when in an internal audit situation, we are tasked with the responsibility of ensuring compliances and review of compliances comprehensively. There should be a self-assessment system in place where the management is going to give you a self-assessment result on legal compliances, and there should be a proper internal management certification process and a governance process around compliances, basis which and coupled with your review, then you can give an assurance opinion. The last is on related party transactions. The standard requires you to identify as internal auditor related party transactions, to check the authorization of the transactions, to verify whether they are at arm's length. Now here you should be cognizant of the fact that in practice there are a lot of related party transactions that are happening outside the books of accounts. So they are like barter transactions. So like say for example, there is a news channel and there is a newspaper publication. Both belong to the common entity and parent. So the newspaper would publish information about the channel and give space in the newspaper, and vice versa would happen on the news channel. They would give some space and information to the newspaper publication. So it results in a barter transaction. So when you look at related party transactions, you have to look beyond the books of accounts to actually see what is the type and nature of the related party transaction. And the standard clearly says that related party transactions would include transfer of resources, services, obligations, etc., regardless whether a price is charged or not charged. So whether there is a pricing criteria or whether it is a barter transaction or an exchange transaction or a secondment transaction from the parent to the subsidiary, it will come into the net of this standard, and internal auditors should review the effectiveness of controls around related party transactions. So this concludes my summary of presentations on internal audit standards. And I thank all of you for a patient hearing. And if there are any questions, then I can take them. I'm sorry I have taken a little bit more time than what was allocated to me.
No problem, sir. Thank you very much for the marathon session. I request Sachin Shah also to come on and Sir, if you can switch on your camera as well. So
Sure.
really grateful for covering all the SIS in such a lucid manner in a marathon session, and at least we could give a complete overview on all the standards. So would now request immediately after this we'll move on into the panel. So I would request Sachin to give a formal vote of thanks for this session. Sachin, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Murtaza. On behalf of WIRC, I would like to propose vote of thanks to CA Huzefa Unwala sir for sharing their insights on standards on internal audit, its objective and practical considerations in implementing the same. Thank you very much, sir, for your time.
Thank you. Pleasure always to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
A loud round of applause for you.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
I request the panel moderator, C. Harish Dua, and all the 4 panelists also to switch on the camera and come on board. And they've been waiting in the green room. And so we get into the panel straight away. And Sachin Shah would introduce Harish, and then Harish would introduce all the panelists, and we get inside. So I also would like to thank Sachin for setting up the program and helping in coordinating and taking it end to end. Sachin, over to you for the introduction of the moderator.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So friends, internal audit function has evolved over a period of time, specifically in the last decade. And with that evaluation, the portfolio of skills and attributes required to do an internal audit has also transformed. At this moment, technical skills are absolutely important and necessary. However, they may not necessarily be, only skills that are required sufficient. Internal auditor of the future should also possess a broad range of non-technical attributes. To share insights today, we have an experienced panel to share insights on skills required for new age internal auditors. Our pleasure to introduce Mr. Harish Dua. Harish Dua is a chartered accountant of 92 batch. He is also a certified internal auditor, certified information system auditor, and certified information system security professional. He has overall post-qualification experience of 25 years. He has worked with multiple companies like Bartley Boy Limited, Godrej Group, Future Group, and GSW Group. He currently heads the internal audit and risk management function at GSW Steel and Group companies. His overall experience includes implementation of ERM framework and its integration with internal audit, fraud investigations, IT audits, implementation of ERPs, and due diligence audits. He is also closely associated with IIA, and he has served as president of IIA Bombay chapter. He is also a frequent speaker in various forums at IIA events, ICI seminars, Bombay Bar Association, CP circles, etc. We welcome you on board, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Sachin, for a nice introduction. And I will also thank WIRC for giving the opportunity to be on panel. First, before I introduce my panel, I want to dedicate 2 lines for my panel members today. ये आज भी अपनी हुनर का दम रखते हैं, ये आज भी अपनी हुनर का दम रखते हैं, रंग बिखर देते हैं वहां जहां पे ये कदम रखते हैं. So I welcome Mr. Anil Gambhir, Mr. Bhaskar, Mr. Venkat, and Mr. Venkatesh. Let me start my introduction with first with Anil Gambhir. Mr. Anil Gambhir is a Chief Financial Officer of Blue Dart Express Limited. Anil has a rich and varied experience of more than 30 years across various verticals such as accounts, finance, taxation, treasury operations, audit. Anil is also responsible for finance, strategy, investor relationship, accounting, and costing at Blue Dart. He has been with Blue Dart since September 1998. In 2003, he was elevated as the Senior Vice President Internal Audit, so he was handling internal audit function of Blue Dart. Subsequently, he has been transferred to finance and he became a CFO. In this role, Anil was instrumental in setting up of a risk management process and audit function in the company. Anil has been confirmed with various awards. He has won top 100 CFO award consecutively for 3 years from 2018 to 2020. Earlier, he was honored with the CFO Next 100 award at CFO Next 100 award 2016, and he was recognized as top 100 upcoming finance leaders of the India Inc. at the 4th annual CFO Next award function in 2015. If you go by academics, he is a commerce graduate, he is a chartered accountant, he is also certified senior advisor for first choice program. This is related to Six Sigma program. He is actively involved in system policy design review, known as a value creator, partnering with business process owners. Anil has attended and he has actually given lectures at various workshops and programs on the topics related to risk management, internal control, financial reporting, IFRS, and Six Sigma. Welcome, Anil. The second panelist is Mr. S. Bhaskar. Mr. Bhaskar is Chief Internal Auditor of Tata Capital Limited. He leads the internal audit function of Tata Capital Limited and provides oversight to internal audit function for its subsidiaries. Engage in commercial finance, infrastructure finance, wealth management, consumer loans, and distribution of marketing of Tata cards. Bhaskar has more than 34 years of experience in leadership and management positions in the field of governance, risk management, internal audit, supply chain management, finance, accounts, business excellence, quality. This also includes his stay with Hindustan Lever Limited, Marico, and New India Assurance Company. As a professional volunteer, Mr. Bhaskar had served as a president of II India, which is affiliated to Institute of Internal Auditors based in Florida. He has also served as a member of II Global Committee. By qualification, he is a commerce graduate and he is also chartered accountant. Welcome, Bhaskar. The third panel member is Mr. T.V. Venkatraman. Mr. T.V. Venkatraman, what we call Mr. Venkat, is a commerce graduate. Apart from that, he is a merit certificate holder and associate member of Institute of Cost Accountants of India, certified information system auditor. He is also certified internal auditor. Venkat brings him with 2 decades of experience, particularly in the manufacturing and servicing sectors across various geographies, domains and governance, risk management, and compliances. Currently, he is working with Ashok Leyland Limited as Chief Internal Auditor. He looks after internal audit and risk management function. Prior to joining Ashok Leyland, he was head of management and assurance function at Flipkart Group. Venkat has also had worked with Aditya Birla Group, Deloitte, Jindal Iron and Steel Limited. Under his leadership, Ashok Leyland bagged ICICI Lombard CNBC TV 18 Risk Management Award in the category of Best Risk Management and Framework Systems, particularly in the automation category. He is also coveted with Golden Peacock Award for Risk Management for the years 2018 and 2019 from the Institute of Directors India. Venkat also serves as a director on the board of CY Curex Systems Private Limited, a Hinduja Group venture, and is a non-executive and non-independent capacity. Welcome, Venkat.
Thank you.
My last speaker is Mr. Venkatesh. Mr. Venkatesh works as a head of risk, internal control, and investor relations in Siemens Limited since past 10 years. He has over 16 years of experience in ICFR, that is Urban Subsidy Act, 10 years in enterprise risk management, has consultancy experience of 9 years and headed a startup for 3 years. Overall, if you see, he has more than 30 years of the experience. By qualification, he is ICMA and CISA certified. He is convener of Mumbai chapter of Initiatives of Change for Business. This is an organization dedicated to promote human-centric ethical business practices. He directs leadership program at Initiatives of Change, Asia Plateau in Panchkini. He is a regular speaker at industry forums in topics related to risk management and ethics. Strategic advisor and board member at Institute of Risk Management UK. He is a founder of RM Next, forum for the chief risk officer. Let me tell you that most of the big Indian corporates are part of this forum, RM Next. So welcome, Venkat. Is Venkatesh is there?
Yeah, I'm there. Unfortunately, there's a problem with my camera.
Okay.
Therefore, I'm like Mr. India, invisible.
So there's a two lines from my side. हुनर तो सब में होता है, किसका छप जाता है, किसका छिप जाता है. So आज आप छिपे हुए हो.
Sorry about that.
So before we start to know that what are the skills required for a new age internal auditor, let us understand that why a company needs an internal auditor. We know that there are some statutory regulations which requires a company to have an internal auditor, whether in-house or outsourced. But apart from this legal requirement, why a company needs an internal auditor? Once we know that what are the expectations of top management, what we call tone at the top, then we'll understand what skills are required to fulfill those. So my first question is to Anil. Can you tell us as a CFO or a director, when you sit in audit committees, what are your expectations from internal auditor?
Thank you, Harish, for introducing, and I would like to wish good evening to fellow panelists and friends. Hope, given the pandemic scenario, all of you are, taking care of yourself and also your near and dear ones. At the outset, I would like to thank WIRC also for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts and also have new learnings from the interaction. Coming to Harish, your topic, expectation of CFO or director from audit head. I think if I was to summarize in 2 words, it's no surprise and add value. While it looks very small, but there's a lot which goes behind this. And when you talk about a lot, meaning there are multiple things which go in ensuring that when you talk about no surprise and you talk about value addition, it is easier said than done. So basically, there are certain basic rules for an internal auditor to know, like knowing organization, business strategy, looking closely, working with leadership team. All these are basic, and I would treat them as a hygiene, right? But at the same time, there are a number of changes which are, which businesses are seeing, and as a result of those changes, the challenges and expectations are increasing. So one can say even the challenges and expectations are also becoming agile. So not only the systems needs to be agile, even the challenges are also becoming agile. Having said that, I think in a recent past we've seen many regulatory changes and emergence of new business model, because of which businesses are changing, and as a result, the role of internal auditor also is becoming more challenging. And at the same time, and there are fast, the changes which are happening, they are very fast. So obviously that adds further complications. So given the current scenario, the first challenge comes in, or the expectation from an auditor would be, first unlearn what he knows about it already, and then relearn new things. And that also has to be fast paced. Reason being, because if you take time to relearn, obviously by the time the change, another change will have taken place. So by ensuring fast learning, one can ensure that there are no surprises, but at the same time continue to add value to the business. Having said that, without technology, nothing is possible in current scenario. I mean, it's gone are the days when one can say that without technology, I can work and still deliver. So now taking technology as a hygiene, the next level of technology used in audit is leveraging analytics to not only improve audit process, but also performance. So if one looks at it, number of ways data is being generated in the organization. So using the data and getting insights from that from the data, one can also look at what kind of risk an organization could face. Now there could be a few examples here which one could review in the perspective of risk management, which could be that when you look at certain patterns of utilization within the system, it could give you some feel that there's how big is the risk in terms of looking at pattern, whether there could be a cyber risk. Similarly, many times, audit heads are part of strategic meeting. So when strategic meetings are taking place and he is party to contribute or to review strategic risk, he could also look at it that whether the strategy has been rightfully understood by the concerned people, so that there is no gap in understanding, and strategy implementation the way it is expected would be done by the organization. Apart from that, generally one looks at it, when company undertakes a bigger project by investing resources and money in that. So whether generally audit reviews post the incidents happening or the post completion of project, whether it is completed or no. I think there's a proactive role from the auditor here to review all the investments in ongoing basis, using predictive model to see whether the project, what is the likelihood of project being delivered successfully and on time, and there are no budget overruns. So I think these kind of things would be expected beyond the basics. So having said that, when these are the expectations, obviously this cannot be delivered without having right resources. So one needs to have right mix of resources to deliver on the expectations. So a different kind of skill sets depending on the kind of industry audit head working in would require different kind of skill sets to deliver on the expectations. This is what I feel, that beyond a normal regulatory compliance, there is a much bigger aspect of risk management and also using technology tools, data analytics to deliver more on value addition apart from the surprise element. Over to you, Harish.
Thanks, Anil. Now I go to the Bhaskar. Bhaskar, we just listened to Anil. He has given a long list of the expectations. I will summarize in simple one line. Jada kam, come down. So now I ask you, Bhaskar, as the chief internal auditor of your company, when you listen these type of expectations from your top management, in a chief internal auditor, what do you feel that those skills are required to fulfill these expectations?
Thank you, Harish. Thank you, WRC. Good evening, friends. Good evening, fellow panelists. Well, as was said in the keynote address, as also in the previous sessions, the profession has really, evolved in this much sought after. There's so much of demands. Like when anything goes wrong, where is the internal auditor? So, net, what is it? It is basically the same thing. You have to provide assurance, you have to provide advice. Now, before it was either assurance or advice. Now it is always assurance plus advice. Assurance that nothing can go wrong, has gone wrong, no surprises. Advice that, objectives are getting met, we are able to reduce cost, we are able to reduce cycle time, we are able to partner in strategy. So it's kind of, it's like, never ending. So the only way is for the professionals like us to step up. It's like a continuous treadmill, but then, we need to always keep in mind our fundamentals. Now let's reflect what is a skill. So I was just looking at the Google definition, the ability to do something well, expertise. So it's something very simple. I guess it was always there. So in the change, again, this is relevant. So how do we do it? There are a couple of things. We need to look at our stakeholders. Now we have different stakeholders. We have regulators. We also have shareholders also. We also have the board. We have the board committees. Then we have the statutory auditors. Then within the organization, we have the KMPs. Then we have the SMPs, senior management professionals. Then we also have the process owners. Then within ourselves, like we have our own team, or maybe we have an outsourced partner. So it's like a balancing game, different people have different expectations. So let us start with, say, individual, stakeholders, like for example, a regulator or a shareholder, his more focus is on assurance, no surprises, nothing has gone. From a board perspective or from a statutory audit perspective, also the same thing, it's an assurance. Whereas you come to the internal stakeholders, it is more advice. So now, how do we cope up? What kind of skills can be there? So we can broadly categorize this into a technical skill and soft skills. Now, technical skills, we have a lot of material available. We have standards. So which we had a long session on the various standards. So sometimes, we might feel, yaar, itna standards karega, to like, how will we kind of, cope up? But then, like the way to, implement the technical standards, that's where the soft skills come. So what are soft skills now? Typically now, the most important skill for an auditor, for all of us as CS, is the auditing kida. The most important is auditing kida. So we need to have that auditing, instinct. The second thing is professional skepticism. These two are fundamentals. Then the fundamental element of trust but verify. Now, of course, we can talk on with more empathy. We talk about initiative. We talk about communication skills. We talk about critical thinking. We talk about curiosity. We can talk about executive presence, be everywhere. Like wherever things are happening, you are there. But just if you stand back, as we go along, as we think, there are two big themes which are there. One is to be relevant first. So how do we stay relevant? There are so many things which are happening. Before pandemic, during pandemic, post pandemic. Is internal audit relevant? How do we keep pace? So change is a given. So now, for example, we will have remote work. We will have, we don't have all this we don't get any kind of leads now. So right now in a remote environment, how do we get leads? So we have to just rely on whatever is shown digitally. So how do we kind of develop the skill sets? How do we kind of adapt? How do we adopt to new technology? How do we onboard new team members? How do we collaborate in a remote manner? How do we impart training? How do we train ourselves? How do we build relationship? How do we sustain relationships? So this is where the skill of being relevant. That's extremely important skill. There is also another very important skill which has come out is to be resilient. Suppose things have gone wrong. You should have the capacity to rebound. You should have the ability to achieve. You should have the capability to succeed. So, as the new IA global president, I had the opportunity to listen to her. I think many of us must have listened to that. So she used a simple acronym called something called TACT, TACTT. T is technology. How do we kind of leverage? Second is agility. How do we become agile? How do we collaborate? The C is for collaboration. The double T is one is talent. How do we invest in talent? How do we make ourselves talented? How do we make our team talented? How do we make our partners talented? The most important skill, the last part is tenacity. We should be able to kind of adapt. We should have the we should be tenacious, should persevere. We should become relevant. We should become a partner. So that's what there's so much of things to be done. So I guess, with these skills, internal profession is in a position to kind of step up and it can meet all the requirements. Over to Arish.
Thank you, Bhaskar. Go to the Venkatraman. Venkatraman, now we knew that we understood what Bhaskar is saying as a captain of internal audit department. So simply he is telling me that I want a player in my team who hits like Virat Kohli, who fields like Suresh Raina, and who bowls like Bumrah. Now let's come to that. When captain wants these type of qualities in one player, middle level manager who's working in internal department, a team leader which we call, not a CAE but one level below the CAE. What are the skills you feel that he should require to cope up what captain is expecting and ultimately what CFO is expecting?
Thank you, Harish, and thank you, WRC. I have a challenge similar to Venkatesh. Unfortunately, my webcam doesn't seem to go live, although I can see myself on the screen, but I don't see the others. So apologies for that, but I think I'm audible. I think Bhaskar has hit the nail on the head. In fact, it is like having a buffet spread of all the relevant competencies. And Harish, as you rightly alluded, it's like, you need to be Virat Kohli plus a Bumrah plus, an all-rounder like a Suresh Raina or Ravindra Jadeja. But anyway, that apart, I think, a captain is only as good as a team. So if I can, pick up from some of the cues from what Bhaskar has said, at the middle level, and typically what I would call as team leaders who execute, who undertake the planning and also oversee the execution of the audit projects. I think they have a lot of responsibility. The CIE has slightly more, I wouldn't use the word relaxed, but slightly more. He is able to see things at a 30,000 feet level and is able to really supervise how effective the team is performing, whereas the team leader has the more arduous task of actually engaging in the execution or in the supervision of the execution. And therefore, if I use the skills, he has to be highly technically skilled. Technical skills could mean auditing skills, could mean a deeper understanding of accounting, could mean a deeper understanding of having a commercial sense in terms of the work that is being performed outside of the business. So deeper business understanding will be required for the middle level management. So in a way, it will be core audit competencies will be definitely a must. Critical thinking will be a must. And I think there is a host of things that one can expect, but to bridge the gap between the CAE and the management, the team leader or the middle management should also, within the audit function, should also have very good communication and listening skills. So in a way, to be effective, as I said in the beginning, a captain is only as good as a team. So how do you really mentor the team to deliver what is expected by the stakeholders? And as Anil said in the beginning, how do we really add value? As the definition of internal auditing also says, that internal audit is an independent and objective assurance and consulting activity. So we have both assurance and consulting, and designed to improve an organization's governance, risk management, and compliance control processes with a view to add value. So the add value, which is just 2 words, is pretty significant in nature. So long story short, the middle tier is actually the backbone of the audit function. They will have to have analytical skills. They spoke about communication skills. They also need to have strong business acumen, which means a deeper understanding of what is it that you're looking for. When you say add value, how do the processes are already established? So how can you go and add value to the process? That's where your business acumen comes into the forefront. Do you have a deep understanding of the business? Do you have a deep understanding of the risk within the business process? Do you have a deep understanding of what can go wrong and what are the checks and balances that are required to really mitigate the risk? And how do you bring through your audit an independent assurance on the area that you're covering? Okay. So I must also add that when we talk about competencies, it is not just about financial reporting skills. Today's age auditor cannot say, I'm a process auditor or I'm only a technical auditor. The answer lies in the fact that a smart age auditor will have to, a smart auditor in the new age will have to balance a deep understanding of business jointly with technical skills, or I should say IT skills. So we will come to that in a short while, I guess, as we progress along this conversation. But the new age internal auditor will have to have a deeper understanding of critical IT skills, whether it is cybersecurity, whether it is application controls, whether it is your IT general controls, alongside a process. Because in no company is a process devoid of an IT interface. So that's really what I wanted to share. Over to you, Harish.
Thanks. Let me summarize what Bhaskar and Venkat was saying. Is very simple. Bhaskar was talking about foresight, right? You were talking about insight. Now I will go to Venkatesh. Venkatesh, now the Venkat has already told us about, and he was talking about risk management, risk assessment, understanding what are the risks which are going to affect the business. My question is that, if I'm suppose an internal auditor, okay, join internal audit department, or maybe I'm at the middle level of the management in internal audit department, how can I get the skills of risk assessment or risk management?
Yeah, let me start. As a start, just a quick audio check. Are you all able to hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's clear. Okay. So first of all, thank you very much. First of all, WIRC for the opportunity to share my experiences, and good evening to Harish, fellow panelists and my dear friends. It's a very apt. It's a good way in which we have gone ahead with the panel so far, with the CFO and then the internal audit, two internal auditors, and then an internal auditor who's also a risk manager, and then now coming to the only non-internal auditor, I guess, in the panel. But I'm more in the risk management and in the internal control field, and I would think one of the biggest benefits or one of the biggest attributes that a risk manager should have is the capability to sense what is not going right within the organization. And I believe this particular skill is required whether you're in risk management or in internal audit. If I were to give an example, if you take the example of Sherlock Holmes, I think those of you who have read his books, you would have found that he took maybe 15-20 days to actually solve the crime, which he eventually did. But most of the time, he had already come to the conclusion within the first day. The moment he goes to a scene, he has already more or less come to a conclusion, or at least significantly, say 95% of the conclusion, based on his sensing capability. That something could be what is wrong, who could be the perpetrator, and the balance 95% of his time is actually goes in getting the right evidences and making sure that the case sticks. And this is one of the possibly the most important skills that a risk manager or an internal auditor needs. Many of the risks are not very apparent. Of course, most of us read a lot about the various risks which are there in the books. But the bigger risks are the ones which are not so apparent. They are lying below the surface. And we should have a capability to sense what could go wrong and find a way to include it in our risk assessment checklists or the audit checklists that we have. Now, a few examples, or how do you go about doing it, would be, for example, very keenly listening to various management discussions that happen. So as and when you are part of management discussions, there could be topics which they bring up, which could give you some leads onto what could be going wrong, and hence what should we do. The second example could be when you look at the body language of an auditee. When you question him, when you do a walkthrough, through the body language, you can already sense what are the various points which possibly needs to be included in your checklist or needs to be additionally verified. For example, for me, the favorite shopping ground is, for example, the company internal improvement projects, or whenever there is a hackathon or an improvement initiative which goes on in the company. Normally, when you're improving something, it is because it is either to improve the efficiency or the effectiveness. Now, if it is for efficiency, then possibly we may not have much scope. But if it's for improving effectiveness, there is a possibility that there is an underlying risk which is being sought to be improved or corrected by doing this particular improvement initiative. So, how do you develop these sensitive skills? And there, I would say, for example, one needs to be at the start, one needs to be very attentive in conferences. For example, conferences like this, where you are already getting a lot of information. You should have listening skills. You should do a lot of reading. As in, when you have the opportunity, you should do a lot of teaching. And most important, you should spend a lot of time networking with people down the line. And we should be able to apply the learning almost immediately, because a lot of times the learning that we have gets lost because we are unable to apply the learning on time. Fundamentally, what I'm talking about is that the aspect of risk should be somewhere deep in our subconscious mind, so that we are able to see what is going wrong the moment you come into a factory or you come into an office. These are the skills that we should really look for in a risk manager.
Thanks a lot. Now I go back to Anil. Now what Venkatesh was saying is very simple, is that get involved in the management discussions and other thing. What Bhaskar was telling about is the business acumen. Now the problem is that normally if you see the internal auditors who work in an internal audit department or outside auditors, outside internal auditors, I say that these are people are coming from the finance background. So when these people go for internal audit, say I am doing an internal audit of a manufacturing company, an internal audit of a IT related company or service related company, getting this business acumen, getting this business understanding becomes difficult. Okay. Now they are also part of your organization. My question to you as a CFO, how can you help your internal auditors to get this business understanding? Can you help them out?
Well, Harish, in fact, it is a mutual goal. So basically, let me first go back to the business acumen. What exactly will classify as a business acumen? Business acumen is nothing but combination of various skills. What we just discussed about soft skill, IT skill, technical skill, and also business knowledge. Now, business knowledge comes from about learning and the experience so far one had. This becomes a complete background basis which one tries to take business decisions, uh, and if it is a successful decision, this is classified as a business acumen, that his decision was good. It has got a lot to do with the self initiative of learning about business, knowing about business outside, not only the company which you are working for, and also reading stuff basis your background, your qualification, and definitely getting a mentor who can guide if you are not on right track, or if you want to seek some guidance. A mentor could help in terms of moving this or taking this acumen further and sharpening it. So the point is, when you talk about developing this acumen, yes, it can be developed, but here most of the role will be played by the self initiative of knowing, understanding, and analyzing self, and also bouncing off the ideas to your mentor to see if you are on right track. That is where the business acumen will get developed over a period of time. As I mentioned, it is based on the experience. Having said that, yes, different business would require different business acumen, different kind of business acumen, because you can have soft skill, you can have IT skill, you can have technical skill, but the kind of organization you're working in, then you need to have that kind of business knowledge. Be it like, if I give you example, if you are into construction business, obviously you need to know nuances of construction, how things happen. Similarly, if you are in aviation business, what are the matrices are there in the business, and how the business decisions are taken, what are the parameters basis which decision would be taken. So when an auditor gets exposure to review of MIS of the company, and also various functions, I think basis that exposure, he'll be able to develop that business acumen. So idea here is, when you have a review, a business review or functional review, if if IA head is taken along, I think that will support a lot in terms of developing and knowing about business and developing business acumen to take decisions. Over to you, Harish.
Thanks, Anil. What can I understand from you is that business acumen is a skill which a person learns on job training, during on job, or it's a self-acquired skill. Normally, you will not get that skill readily available through any courses or any certifications or other thing. Now let me go to
experience. Yeah.
Yes. So let me go to the Venkat. Venkat, when a new person comes and joins internal audit department, the person who wishes to join internal audit department, normally he gets confused. Take example, he is a chartered accountant, he has done good articleship with a good firm and other thing. Suddenly he feels that he may get some new certifications. There are a lot of certifications floating in the market. For example, we have a CISA, we have a DISA, we have CIA, we have a CISM, we have a CERM. So many certifications are there. Just wanted to know from you whether these certifications are essential to enter into the internal audit function, or you feel it is just a value addition?
Early in my career, thanks Harish for the question. I think early in my career, what I was told, and I don't remember which of my bosses mentioned this to me, is that your qualification is only a passport. What you need to succeed is a visa. I think that holds true for any profession, not just internal audit. But having said that, your question is very valid. I mean, typically we have a tendency, and I use the term we in a very generic sense, not specific to my organization, that anyone who has passed the CISA, I mean the CA exam, is qualified to be absorbed into the internal audit function or the finance stream of the organization. Really, how many of them actually succeed in whatever career stream that they choose to undertake in the early stages of their career? I think it would be hardly about 15, 20, 30%, but not everybody. I mean, that's my guess. I could be wrong. But what we really need to do is, whatever be the qualification that one may have, it is the aptitude and the attitude of the person that helps them succeed in the profession that they have chosen. Right? And this, I actually mentor my team to also, I make the statement that it is your attitude which determines your altitude. So long story short, Harish, I think, it doesn't matter whether, initial qualification or CA, whether you want to do a CIA or CISA, that's really secondary. But really what you need to do when you're fresh in the profession is to get down to the nuts and bolts, learn, keep your eyes and ears open, have a keen sense of smell, absorb your, as Anil mentioned rightly, that the business understanding is very critical for the success of an internal auditor. And business understanding has to be backed by critical thinking skills, which means that, you need to question. Bhaskar also alluded to this, that you need to have professional skepticism. I think these are traits that don't come with a qualification as such. These are traits that you gain over a period of time. And if you have an organization which gives you the freedom to explore, freedom to ask questions, so that you can learn in the process, I think it will definitely enhance the skills of the internal auditor. Yes, a CISA or a CIA or any other associated qualification like visa, etc., will only help you understand the subject better, but it is not really your passport for success.
Thanks.
Over to you, Harish.
Now I go to the Bhaskar. Bhaskar is the chief internal auditor. Now you know that these are the skills required in your team. And suppose you don't have some skills in your team. So you may have a Virat Kohli, you may have a Bumrah, but if you don't have Arena, will you like to take substitute? Will you like to outsource if you don't have the skills?
Yeah, definitely. Like, I will like to definitely build a IPL team, So why not make a Mumbai Indian, So I mean, like, anyway, see, it's like, so you to understand from different perspectives. So suppose regulations do permit to outsource. So definitely outsourcing is a very good option. So I mean, for our overall internal audit delivery, there are two components: the technical skills and the soft skills. Now, technical skills, if you suppose you don't have it, and if the organization really, does not believe in, investing in a core function, internal audit is a core function. So you might want to outsource the internal audit to an outsourced service provider. And maybe see, now again, there are many of us, they do not understand the meaning of chief audit executive. So if you see, what is the meaning of a chief audit executive? What is the difference between a chief audit executive and a chief internal auditor? So chief internal auditor actually manages the internal audit function. He has an internal audit team under him. Chief audit executive he manages the auditors. Like, he can outsource audit function. Maybe the auditor can report directly to the board, etc. So for example, I mean, in a company, now the internal audit function has got comprises of people. Generally, they come out of transfers from, say, from business or from finance, etc. So they may not have the intrinsic skill set of actually conducting an audit. They may not have the same skill sets as a core auditor. So you need to balance what are the skill sets, what is lacking. So for example, IT audits now, many times, you outsource. Legal audits, again, you outsource. Compliance audits, you outsource. Stock audits, sometimes you outsource. Depending on geographical reach, whether you want to be able to recruit or one full-time employee. You may want to outsource this. So there are many considerations. Now, how do you manage a outsource vendor or auditor? Now, again, there are models available. One is a co-sourcing model, which is available, or a complete outsourcing model available. Now, in co-sourcing, again, it's almost like a manpower model where your partner, provides qualified professionals and you manage them. The other one is there are some projects which they manage on their own, and some projects you do manage with your own team. So these are all depending on the situation, how all these things are being done. But the best practice, whenever you engage a outsourced service provider or an outsourced internal auditor, is to have the scope very clear, make it very clear as to what are the technical standards, the SIAs to be complied with, because there are legal liabilities. So now CARO is mandating statutory auditors to comment on so many matters. So if that be the case, the statutory auditor should be satisfied with the internal auditing, the size and or the nature of the internal auditing function, whether it is commensurate with the size and the complexity of the organization. So again, the board has to get satisfied, the regulators has to get satisfied. So it is better to have all these things clearly laid out in the engagement letter. Now, again, whether you don't want to share data, you may want to engage, especially in today's environment, whether you want to give them access to our systems, maybe whether we give them VPN or whether we give a virtual desktop infrastructure whereby they come into our domain and do the work. So all these things has to be thought through and has to be clearly articulated in the engagement letter. So I guess it's a very good option, and I guess for really internal auditing to be really effective, you need to have an outsourcing service providers, because there are specialized domains where you will require partners to do this. So even for analytics, sometimes you may not want to have focus on analytics. You may want to focus only on the results. So you may want to engage an analytics partner. So you may want to engage separate an engineering audit. Suppose you may want to engage an engineering a team for that. So I guess it's a good option.
Thanks, Bhaskar. I go to now Venkat. Venkat, what Bhaskar was saying, that if you don't have enough skills, you can go for outsourcing. Now, certain people, like to say that, if you don't have skills, can we use some tools? So can we automate something? Can tools automation replace shortfall in the skills?
Yeah, see, at the end of the day, a tool is only effective if you know how to use it and what you need from it. So at the you can't really put the cart before the horse. The auditor has to really know what is really required. I mean, the core analytical rule sets or the algorithms that should go into the tool, etc., would be really the thought process of the auditor who is undertaking the audit engagement. And therefore my view on this is that you can't really, as I mentioned at the beginning, you can't really put the cart in front of the before the horse. You need to invest in the tool only if you are very clear in terms of what are the end objectives. And therefore the auditors will have to get their hands dirty in terms of undertaking audit engagements, really use the existing infra, if I may use the word, or non-analytics is possible using spreadsheets. But of course, spreadsheets have its own limitations. You can't really perform continuous controls monitoring, or you can't perform certain structured analytics using spreadsheets. So you may have to invest in a tool at a particular point in time. But if you are a newly set up organization, and more so, when today most companies are investing in a lot of technology, it would be a good idea to invest in technology for internal audit, provided the internal audit department has evolved and has understood the challenges of performing the audits using just the Microsoft audits. A lot of work that we do today in an SAP environment is using the process controls tool, which is an extension of the ERC environment of SAP system. So I would say it's an evolutionary process. Yes, we must invest in tools where possible, but I would always back it up with a caveat that invest only if it is absolutely essential. There are firms which actually specialize in data analytics who can come in and do those extended services. As Bhaskar also mentioned, a chief audit executive will have to take a strategic view of how he wants to set up the function and where he wants to leverage the services of outsourced service providers. There could be budgetary constraints, there could be resourcing constraints, because the days of a very large internal audit setup in-house are gone. You will have to leverage on complementary skills offered by external firms, and only then we can add value as a function in a much more quicker and efficient way. So to answer the question, Harish, once again, I think tools are important, critical, no doubt, but one has to, the CAE, I would say, has to perform VED analysis, which is vital, essential, desirable in terms of the kind of tools that one may want to invest in for the in-house function, vis-a-vis getting an external agency come and do periodical data analytics shared queries.
Thank you. Now I go to Venkatesh. Venkatesh, one thing I just want to know your view on this fraud risk. Do you feel that internal auditors are equipped with doing fraud risk investigations and other things, or do you feel that it should be left to some external expert firms?
Yeah, see, I think at the outset, what I would like to reiterate is the focus of internal audit or internal control is primarily in identifying weaknesses in the risk mitigation within a process. And normally it does not include looking into the people aspect of frauds. And here I'm talking about purely from the role of internal audit as differentiated from the role of an investigator for frauds. Now, having said that, there is definitely one area, and that is the internal auditor should definitely have a very strong understanding of anti-fraud controls. Definitely an orientation towards investigation is a useful addition to his skills inventory. And sometimes when you have these investigative skills, that may also help you in identifying how to strengthen the process further against individual people who may be inclined towards committing frauds. So from that point of view, I think that knowledge would definitely be useful. And in addition, I believe it also helps in further career progression, because in many large companies, I've seen that the investigation team is independent of the internal audit team. So if you want to have some kind of diversification or job rotation, it also helps from that angle. Over to you, Bhaskar.
I come to the Bhaskar. Bhaskar, I want to know that there are people, in our audience, they may be belonging to some CA firms or external firms who are giving services of internal audit services to the organizations. So first we talked about, what are the skills required for a chief internal auditor, the level of internal auditor. What are the additional skills are required if you are outside internal auditor? Do you feel that some additional skills are required if I'm running a CA firm and trying to give internal audit service to the corporates?
Yeah, in addition to the core function of doing internal audit, conducting internal audit, or maybe like presenting internal audit results. So it is also a profession, like, it's business. So fundamental, business commercial skills are extremely important. So in terms of like, what are the avenues where internal auditing services can be, offered? So, beyond whatever is the mandate, whether how do we increase more and more areas where auditing can be, internal auditing can be done. Say, can we do a board evaluation service? So can we do that? So maybe like how do we invest in knowledge? How do we publish research papers? So how do we build a training module for you, So how do we again, within, since it's a profession, while we deliver the internal auditing function, but whether running, you have to be very careful on the project management, like what is the scope creep which can happen. So sometimes something is asked, and tendency of the client can be asked more and more, so that also can be a challenge. And there can be also avenues for networking within the client organization, whereas you offer internal auditing for to the internal audit department. In addition, you discover that there is a IFC process documentation which is happening through the CFO. Then you meet the CFO, and then you go network with him and get a separate mandate and do for that. So this is a continuous business development activity which is always there. So I think and apart from that, so within a professional firm, the people who are there, I mean, in fact, today morning, I asked for a skill set from a firm, So one of the things which is I can see is that, the building and managing relationships, like a formal customer satisfaction results, in terms of how do we, develop, promote internal auditing services through maybe international practices, how it can be brought. So all those issues are there, all those, avenues are there. So I mean, it's a business, it's a profession by itself, so which will call for a very high degree of business acumen in practice, deployed in practice. So it can't be advice, it is actually to be doing business. That's it. Over to you.
Thanks, Bhaskar. I go to Venkatesh now. Venkatesh, so the new term which is coming up in internal audit, say the internal auditor should be trusted advisor. Now, to become a trusted person of a management or trusted person of board, what are the additional skills required? So we are not talking about now internal audit, how to be done, but how to become a trusted advisor.
Yeah, very interesting question. And I think increasingly, not only are we expected to be trusted advisors to management at the senior level, but very often also to managers at middle level, so that people can proactively come and ask us, how can I do my work in such a way that you do not have any findings from me when you actually do an audit. These are some of the challenges that we increasingly face. But I would go by a few criteria. First of all, in general, to improve the image of the internal auditor, of course, we should start by having a more positive orientation. I always believe that while we need to come out with what is wrong, it also helps to inform management, inform the people about what is going right, so that they find it within themselves to accept our audit reports in a more open and a friendly manner. Overall, as internal auditors, we should definitely be much more business friendly in our approach, be empathetic to the kind of business challenges that are faced. I have seen internal auditors who sometimes question business on why was this right person, why did this right person not sign this document, and any amount of discussions, information from the business telling them this was the emergency situation under which this could not be done. It does not make them relent, and they end up actually raising a higher priority audit points than we would normally want to do in such emergency situations. So a lot more empathy towards business should definitely be there. At the same time, we should definitely be bold enough to bring out the big issues. And we should also have the judgment to differentiate between the big and the small issues. Because again, this is another risk that I've seen in internal auditors. Sometimes they tend to trivialize or tend to sensationalize relatively trivial points. And when something like that happens, then when the really big topic comes, the story of cry wolf happens, and people say, okay, internal auditor ka to kaam hi hai sab bolna. So how do we make sure that we bring out the big issues and be able to differentiate between big and small? Also would help in a great way to be a trusted advisor or to be a consultant to management.
Thanks. Now I come to Anil for the last question. Anil, what happens is that we have seen some organization, they recruit fresh graduates, fresh professionals in internal department, and after a couple of years they get transferred to other operating departments. whether it's a commercial, whether it's a finance, whether it's a taxation, whether it's a sales and marketing. Some organization at the middle level of the management, they transfer internal auditor to other department. And some organization, we also seen that chief internal auditor is getting transferred to other operating departments. You are one of the examples of that. So I just want to know that if you are a CFO, if you want to transfer an internal audit department person to other department, what are the skills, particular skills, couple of skills which you see, then you decide that yes, this candidate is the right candidate to work apart from internal audit department in other departments also.
I think Harish, your question is inspired from Dhoni's retirement. Looks like. What after retirement? So what after audit role, right? So the perspective here is, I think if I take you back to the organizations where you will find that generally exposure to entire business processes is not there with any single function. So people generally are confined to the function which they are operating in. And in fact, some of the good organizations where job rotation exists, there also there are limited ways in which rotation happens in the perspective of different function is restricted. So like a finance guy may get exposure to 2 or 3 functions, but audit is a function which provides exposure to the full business environment, entire business working processes, and including risk. I think this function creates a kind of a talent which is which should be a hot pick for any function, provided the person's background suits. When I say background, meaning the educational qualification suits if there is a technical requirement. So having said that, I think there is a good amount of I would say basis the technical education the person has it, and the organizations, the type of organization, he would be able to work very efficiently and appreciate the decisions which are taken would be not only basis his own function, but also realizing that how his decision or his working impacts cross function and also organization, because he already has a full perspective of organization working. I think from that perspective, there should not be worry for any of the internal auditor. If the auditor has worked very efficiently, he will be hot pick for any function to to get into that. But only I would say a strict mark is if there is a technical requirement, technical education requirement, that could be a challenge. Otherwise, he can fit into anywhere.
Thank you, Anil. This was my last question, and before I wrap up the discussion, just wanted to dedicate 2 lines on the internal audit function. What I remember that what Bhaskar is saying, trust but verify. So I just wanted to say that जमाने में आए हो तो जीने का हुनर रखना, जमाने में आए हो तो जीने का हुनर रखना, दुश्मनों से खतरा नहीं, अपनों पे नजर रखना. Thanks a lot.
So, thank you very much, Hareshji and the whole panel. There were lots of points on the chat box. I will raise 2 questions from my side, and then Sachin Shah will also raise a few, and then we'll close it maybe. So what if the internal auditor failed to detect fraud in the area of engagement?
Okay.
The question is, what if the internal auditor failed to detect fraud in the area of engagement?
Okay, who will take it? Bhaskar, can you take this question?
Is there any
engagement? In the engagement, in the sense, fraud in the engagement is okay. Fraud included project, maybe we can say. Oh yeah, I mean, like basically.
So maybe
no, he's duty bound to kind of highlight that. He's duty bound to report it. So I mean.
So I think the participant is trying to ask that if he is given one audit of say procure to pay or something, and in whatever sample he selects, he does not come across a fraud. So is he liable? That is what he's trying to ask, I think.
If he has, I mean, he should be able to defend that he has been diligent enough to examine this properly. Has he followed the SIAs properly? Can he demonstrate that, like he has examined all those matters? See, it is like this, that, what is that, that Injeti, what's his name? The famous statement, like, I mean, what is that, it's understandable if you don't find a pin in the haystack, But you can't, escape if you see elephants dancing and you are not reporting. So you're responsible.
Just to give you a simple view of the question that depends upon the situation. If you are an external auditor, no problem, you will get away with that. If you are an internal auditor at middle level of management, you may get away. If you are chief internal auditor, sorry sir, your neck will be at the stake.
Completely.
So I would like to add to what both Bhaskar and Harish said. See, if you are a statutory auditor, then 143.12 and internal auditors and you will have to, during the course of conduct, if you have reasonable belief and suspicion, then you will have to highlight. Again, the SIAs and the global IIA also says that if you come across something where you have reason to believe, then you don't wait for your report to get finalized. You immediately report if it is critical and if it is a fraud. But I think overall it still remains that you are still not a bloodhound, you are a watchdog.
Exactly.
So you don't go, it is not your duty to investigate and find out frauds, but if something glaring, which Bhaskar said and Harish also said, you need to immediately highlight.
May I add to that? I think the understanding which is coming, the assignment which was undertaken was not for the purpose of finding fraud. The assignment was undertaken for the purpose of audit. And audit, if it is sample based audit, obviously there will be error of sample could be there. As long as the auditor is able to defend himself in terms of his diligence, there should not be any issue. But yes, in current scenario, when now tools are being used and the entire data is being taken up as a sample and analyzed, and then he leaves out something, then obviously he will be in a challenging situation.
Sure. Great. Thank you.
It's an onerous duty. We are all professionals. We are duty bound. We are accountable. We need to be credible.
Absolutely.
Perfect. So one more question which I noted, an interesting question. What is the difference between auditing and consulting activity in terms of IA?
Okay. So the question is that what is the difference between auditing and consulting? Correct. Normally, when we say auditing, we talk about assurance services. So you are giving assurance that all the compliances are met. You are giving assurance that all the policies and procedures of company are being complied with. So you are giving assurance that everything is okay. So for example, even the statutory auditor, if you see that if company is making loss of X amount, if it is reported X amount is loss, the statutory auditor has done the job. Correct. When you do auditing, internal auditing, then you say that if companies suffer X amount of loss, why this X amount of loss has come? So that is internal auditing. But if you go beyond and give a consultancy and say that how can we can overcome this loss, how can we improve on this, how can we improve our efficiencies, how can we reduce our wastages, how can we reduce our losses, then it becomes consultancy.
I just want to phrase it in a different manner. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, Venkat here. Can I add on to what Harish said if you allow me a minute?
Yeah, Venkat. Please go ahead.
Yes, so Harish, to add to what you said, I think assurance, you have three parties to the engagement. The primary assurance is to the board, because internal audit being an independent function and reporting to the audit committee of the board. I think the fundamental assurance is to the the board of directors, the audit committee of the board. The secondary stakeholder, which is really, from an internal point of view, the primary stakeholder is the function to whom the assurance is being provided, and that could include the CFO or the CEO plus the function head. So it's going to have three parties to the engagement activity. Whereas when you talk about consulting is purely an internal activity undertaken at the request of the stakeholder who has requested for it. So if your head of procurement has requested for a study of the various procurement practices, and you are submitting a report on what are the areas where efficiencies can be built in, or where controls can be baked in, I think that is an consulting activity only between the head of procurement and the internal audit function. That is not required to be updated to the audit committee of the board. So it's also an angle that one can talk about.
Perfect. Fantastic.
So just to add only 2 words. Here, auditing is no surprise, and consulting is value addition.
Is it a ticker on? Time ticker on, is it?
Thank you.
No. So I don't know, some noise from somewhere.
Right. So the time ticker on.
So actually, before I hand over back to Sanjay for the formal vote of thanks, and to Harish for any final this thing, there are lot of comments on the chat box. So for all the participants, see, like there will be presentations will be shared by the speakers, and the speakers presentation in PDF will be uploaded on WRC website within 48 hours time, and you can download from there. Okay, and even the recording of the sessions will be uploaded on WRC website. As far as the panel goes, in the panel there is no presentation as such, and as there is no material to share. And on the questions, we'll try to answer the questions I did today also. We try to answer as the panel goes on as well, and then we'll ask the panelists as well. But if there are any specific questions, you can even write to wrc@ici.in. or for any presentation, PPT, or even questions, you can write to wrcevents@ici.in, and we'll get back to you. So that was one. The second one important thing which couple of people have put there also and on WhatsApp as well is a break between the speaker and the panel. What we'll do is tomorrow we'll bring in some council member in between for his comments for 2-3 minutes, so that in the meanwhile, if someone wants to take a break, can break. And or otherwise we can cover the introduction, etc., while you are away for your break, so that you can come in and join. And so that is what I would put it. And Harishji, anything from your side again?
No, nothing. I'd like to thank WRC for giving us opportunity, and it was. I will also like to thank my panel speakers for answering the questions. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Murtuza. Thank you,
So
panelists. Thank you, Pam.
then I then hand over back to Sanjay Nikam. Sanjay, for your final and formal vote of thanks.
Thank you, Murtuza bhai. Thank you, Murtuza bhai. It's indeed a matter of immense pleasure and honor for me to share dais with such distinguished and eminent personalities. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
At the outset, I congratulate WRC and its committee members for organizing such a wonderful and detailed refresher course on internal audit. I congratulate WRC for choosing such an important topic for deliberation and inviting such eminent speakers from various industries to share their knowledge and experience with us. I, Sanjay Nikam, on behalf of the WRC and all the delegates, wish to extend my gratitude to all the panelists. Sri Venkatraman TV from Ashok Leyland, Sri Anil Gambhir from Blue Dart, Sri Venkatesh from Siemens, CA.S. Bhaskar from Tata Capital Limited. I also thank CA Harish Dua from JSW, as he kept the session live with his Shero Shairi and performed his role as a moderator efficiently. One more thing I'd like to point out here, that Venkatraman sir and Venkatesh sir, we can't see you, but as I remember one quote, make your presence felt, not seen. And you have very well proved your presence with your experience and knowledge, sir. We'd like to see you in next session or whenever possible, because your experience is so vital for our members that we would like to interact with you again. This is for all panelists. Your hands-on experience in various fields has given us insight of the industry and also enlightened us with the perceptions of the industries towards the chartered accountants. Friends, with changing economic scenarios, expectations from the chartered accountants as internal auditors are increased. To match these expectations, it's become imperative for us to adopt new skill sets We had very effective discussion on these aspects today. I'm quite confident that our delegates must have benefited with this knowledge sharing from panelists with the help of new technologies and inherent analytical skills of chartered accountants. I'm confident that our fraternity members will justify its role as internal auditor in future also. At the end, I would like to acknowledge the relentless efforts of CA Lalit Bajaj, Chairman of WRC, CA Murtuza Kaswala, Secretary of WRC, for providing such a knowledge sharing opportunity for our members. I appreciate the contribution made by my colleagues, CA Sumit Doshi sir, CA Sachin Shah sir, in today's seminar, webinar in fact. Last but not the least, big thanks to all the participants for their overwhelming response to this referential course. I request all the delegates to join me in appreciating the contribution made by all the speakers, panelists, moderators, WRC committee members, and last but not the least, WRC staff members for making this session a big success. Thank you very much, everyone. Over to you, C. Murtuza sir.
Thank you, Sanjay, and thank you, Harish, Bhaskar, Mr. Venkatesh, Venkatraman, and Anil ji. Thank you. Thank you. Excellent session. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you.